What if the boundary between your dreams and waking reality could blur, gently guiding you into a restorative slumber? Submerge yourself in 3 hours of sonic landscapes and subtle narratives designed to unlock new realms of perception. Prepare for a uniquely peaceful descent into sleep, where every thought manifests. Let's start with first. Self-fulfilling prophecy. Imagine a thought, small and fragile, forming in the mind. At first, it is only an idea, a suspicion, a whisper of possibility. But when belief clings to it tightly, it changes everything. A person acts as if it were already true, subtly at first, then decisively. Choices bend, tones shift, actions follow. And slowly, the world rearranges itself to match the story. What began as imagination becomes reality. This is the power of the self-fulfilling prophecy. A belief so strong it sculpts the outcome it expects. Consider a student who believes they are destined to fail. They approach their studies with doubt, hesitation, and half-hearted effort. Anxiety clouds their focus, procrastination eats away their time. And when the exam arrives, their lack of preparation ensures failure. The prophecy proves itself. But notice, the failure was not fate. It was created by belief. The story written in the mind became the script followed in action. The opposite is just as true. A person convinced they will succeed often works harder, carries confidence into challenges, and persists through setbacks. Others sense their determination, offer help, open doors. And suddenly, what once seemed unlikely begins to unfold. Success does not arrive by magic, it arrives because behavior, fueled by belief, builds the road to it. The self-fulfilling prophecy does not stop with individuals. It shapes societies. Consider rumors in a marketplace. If enough people believe a bank is failing, they rush to withdraw their money. The panic itself collapses the bank, even if it was stable before. Belief triggers behavior. Behavior cements belief. A cycle closes on itself, transforming imagination into reality. In psychology, this effect appears in classrooms as the Pygmalion effect. When teachers expect excellence, students tend to rise to that expectation. Subtle signals, encouragement, attention, patience, create an environment where belief lifts performance. The opposite is the golem effect, where low expectations quietly suffocate potential. Again, the prophecy writes itself into being. At its core, the self-fulfilling prophecy reveals how thought and reality intertwine. We imagine the world as solid and objective, but much of human life is constructed from expectation, perception, and belief. What we anticipate shapes how we act shapes what happens. The prophecy is not magic, it is feedback, looping endlessly between mind and world. And yet, there is something almost mystical about it. A thought can seed a future. A single expectation, invisible and intangible, can ripple outward until it becomes fact. It is as if belief is a lens through which reality bends, aligning itself to what we dare, or fear, to expect. The warning is clear: stories we tell ourselves matter. If we feed ourselves tales of weakness, of inevitable failure, of doom, we will likely live them out. But if we dare to believe in strength, growth, and possibility, our actions can turn those, too, into truth. We become both prophets and creators, speaking into existence the worlds we later inhabit. So the next time you whisper to yourself a prediction, ask, is this the story I want to live? Because every belief, no matter how small, carries with it the seed of a prophecy. And belief, once planted, does not sit still. It grows roots in action. It blossoms in outcome. Until one day you wake and realize the future you inhabit was written long ago, in the expectations you chose to believe. Reputation sculpting. We are not only who we are who others say we are, and who we begin to believe we are. Reputation is not a shadow that follows us passively. It is a sculpture, carved stroke by every story told, every rumor repeated, every narrative echoed. Over time, those stories harden, and like stone, they shape the figure others see, and often the figure we ourselves inhabit. Think of a block of marble. At first, it is raw, undefined, full of infinite potential forms. But once the chisel strikes, a direction is chosen. The more blows it receives, the more permanent the shape becomes. Reputation works the same way. A single story might be dismissed, but repetition chisels it into permanence. Praise repeated becomes identity. Accusation repeated becomes fate. What was once soft clay of possibility hardens into the stone of belief. Psychologists call this the illusory truth effect. The more often a statement is repeated, the more true it feels, regardless of its accuracy. If people hear often enough that someone is kind, brilliant, or trustworthy, they begin to treat that person as if they are those things. And if someone is branded cruel, dangerous, or unworthy, the repetition etches it into collective perception. Reality bends to narrative, not the other way around. But here lies the deeper twist. Once the sculpture is built around us, we begin to move within its form. A person praised as a leader may start to act like one, because the world already sees them as such. A person condemned may shrink into their assigned role, because resistance feels futile. Reputation does not merely describe us, it reshapes us. In time, the repetition of stories becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, collapsing infinite possible selves into the one most spoken aloud. History is full of such sculpting. Figures remembered as visionaries were often dismissed in their own time until repeated stories transformed ridicule into reverence. Others were immortalized as villains, their flaws told and retold until they eclipsed all other truths. Reputation survives beyond life itself, sculpting not just identity but legacy, carving how future generations will remember or forget. And yet, reputation is never entirely ours. It is a sculpture made by many hands, our own, through our actions and words, but also the voices of others, through their retelling and reframing. Control is partial at best. We may try to guide the narrative, but once released, it takes on a life of its own. The repetition begins to sculpt us in ways we cannot stop. So we must ask, do we fight against the sculpture others carve, or do we step into it and become the figure it demands? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between, shaping what we can, accepting what hardens beyond us, but never forgetting that the self is not marble. Beneath the sculpture lies something fluid, alive, capable of breaking free. Reputation sculpting is both power and prison. It is how greatness is built, and how lives are destroyed. It is how myths are born, and how truths are buried. And in the end, it reveals a haunting fact: who we become is never only what we choose. It is also what others repeat, until repetition becomes reality. History retelling loop. History is never just history. Once an event passes into memory, it begins to bend. Stories replace details, myths fill in the gaps, and soon what people believe becomes more powerful than what actually happened. Entire civilizations have been shaped not by the raw truth of their past, but by the mythologized version retold across generations. And here is the haunting twist: the more those myths influence the present, the more the present reshapes itself to resemble the myth. Reality begins to circle back, until the myth feels factual. Not because it ever was, but because people lived as though it were. This is the history retelling loop, a cycle where stories overwrite truth, and truth becomes indistinguishable from story. Consider the founding myths of nations. Rome's origin was told through the tale of Romulus and Remus, twins raised by a wolf, destined to build a city of destiny. Did a wolf truly suckle abandoned infants? Likely not. But the Romans believed it, and that belief became a blueprint for their behavior. They lived as though they were chosen, fierce children of fate, conquerors born from divine struggle. The myth shaped their politics, their wars, their empire, until the story felt inseparable from fact. The loop had closed, the story made the people, and the people made the story true. Or take the legends of divine kingship in ancient Egypt. Pharaohs were not just rulers, they were gods made flesh, keepers of cosmic order. Was that literally true? Of course not. But because Egyptians believed it, they built temples, monuments, and laws around it. The myth shaped their civilization, and over centuries the stones themselves seemed to testify to its reality. The divine story became the evidence of divinity. Again, the loop sealed itself. Myth begot behavior, behavior begot monuments, monuments begot truth. This loop does not belong only to the ancient world. Even in modern times, historical myths shape identity, politics, and culture. Stories of revolution, of golden ages, of lost homelands are retold, polished, simplified. Over time, they harden into memory, even when the details are wrong. But here is the key: when enough people live by a myth, the consequences are real. Wars are fought. Borders are drawn. Nations rise and fall. Whether the story was accurate no longer matters. What matters is that it was believed, and the belief reshaped reality. Psychologists call this a feedback loop of collective memory. The past is retold, simplified, mythologized. That version of the past influences how societies act in the present. Those actions create new evidence, new monuments, new traditions, which reinforce the myth itself. A child grows up learning the story not as story, but as fact. Generations later, the distinction between history and mythology is gone. The loop is complete. Reality has been rewritten. And the most unsettling part? This is happening right now. Every nation, every culture, every community retells its own origin stories. Some polish the past into glory, others into tragedy. Myths of victory, myths of suffering, myths of chosen destiny, all become tools for shaping behavior. What we call identity is often a loop of retold stories, cycling so long they feel like reality itself. Our memories are not neutral records, they are rewritten scripts, replayed until they harden into belief. And once belief solidifies, it governs action. Myths create reality, and reality, in turn, preserves the myth. So the question is not whether myths are true. The question is, what truths will they create? A myth of unity can build bridges. A myth of superiority can spark war. A myth of loss can fuel resilience, or endless revenge. The retelling loop does not care about accuracy. It only cares about impact. And once a story is believed, its shadow shapes the future as strongly as any fact. We live inside these loops, often without realizing it. When you repeat a story about your family, your culture, your country, you are not only remembering, you are rewriting. You are keeping the loop alive. And perhaps that is the deepest paradox of human history. Truth is fragile, but stories are resilient. Myths endure because they are retold, and because they are retold, they become the scaffolding of reality. The history retelling loop never ends. Myths shape behavior, behavior reinforces myths, and over time the line between the two vanishes. What was once imagination becomes indistinguishable from fact. And so we inherit not the past as it was, but the past as it has been told, looped endlessly, until the story itself becomes our reality. Expectation framework. Every mind carries a hidden framework, an invisible structure through which we interpret the world. It begins not with what is real, but with what we expect. We move through life assuming patterns will hold, that the future will echo the past, that outcomes will align with our beliefs. This is the expectation framework, treating assumptions as certainty until reality either confirms them or shatters them. From the moment we wake, this framework is at work. We expect the floor to hold when we step out of bed, the sun to rise, our own reflection to greet us in the mirror. We expect words we speak to be understood, objects we hold to obey gravity, people we know to act as they always have. These are not conscious calculations, they are silent contracts with reality. But every contract carries risk, because the world is not bound to our expectations. And when it refuses to conform, the framework cracks. Consider a simple example: waiting for a friend. You expect them to arrive on time. The framework builds an image. You see them walking through the door, hear their voice, feel the relief of their presence. Each passing minute without them adds strain. Reality has not yet matched the imagined outcome. Frustration grows, doubt creeps in, suspicion builds. Nothing has truly happened, yet the framework distorts your emotions because your expectation has not been fulfilled. The stress comes not from reality, but from the gap between assumption and truth. On larger scales, this framework can shape entire societies. Economies boom and collapse on the weight of expectations. Markets do not move solely on facts, but on belief about what facts will come. A rumor alone can cause billions to shift in seconds. Wars have been started because leaders assumed enemies would back down, only to discover reality resisted. Revolutions rise because people expect change, and when that change does not come, pressure explodes. The expectation framework is not just individual, it is collective, written into the psychology of nations and civilizations. Psychology itself is riddled with its influence. The placebo effect is a perfect example. Patients given sugar pills often heal, not because of chemistry, but because of expectation. The body conforms to belief. Similarly, the Pygmalion effect shows how teachers' expectations can sculpt students' performance. Treat someone as capable, and they often become so. Treat them as doomed to fail, and the prophecy fulfills itself. Reality bends under the weight of assumption, until, of course, it refuses to. And when it does not bend, the collapse can be catastrophic. But perhaps the most dangerous element of the expectation framework is how it operates invisibly. We rarely question it. We assume the world owes us alignment, that the script we carry in our minds is the one the universe will follow. When life veers off that script, when plans dissolve, when relationships betray, when outcomes diverge from hope, we feel not just surprise, but a fracture. Anxiety, anger, despair, all arise not solely from events themselves, but from the gap between what we assumed and what occurred. The framework is not wrong for existing, it is necessary, but it is fragile. There is a lesson hidden here. The more rigid the framework, the sharper the pain when it breaks. A person who expects certainty in love may collapse when faced with betrayal. A person who expects constant success may unravel at failure. A society that assumes endless growth may implode when confronted with limits. Flexibility, then, becomes survival. The ability to hold expectations loosely, to treat them as possibilities rather than guarantees, shields us from collapse. Philosophy has long warned us of this. The Stoics urged detachment from expectation, reminding us that reality will do as it must, regardless of what we assume. Buddhism speaks of suffering born from attachment, the expectation that life must align with desire. Even modern science reflects this truth. Experiments are designed to test assumptions, not confirm them blindly, because nature is under no obligation to match theory. The expectation framework is useful, but it is only a lens. To confuse it for reality itself is to invite disillusion. And yet, there is power in expectation. Without it, we cannot move forward. We expect the seed we plant will grow, the bridge we build will stand, the effort we give will return something of value. Expectation fuels action, frames ambition, gives direction. The danger lies only when we forget its fragility. When we begin to treat expectation not as a tool, but as truth. So perhaps the art of living is not in erasing expectation, but in mastering it. To build frameworks strong enough to guide us, yet light enough to bend when the world pushes back. To move with anticipation, but not collapse in shock when anticipation is wrong. To remember that assumptions are scaffolds, not destiny. Look closely, and you will see the expectation framework at work everywhere, shaping love, war, science, belief, memory, and hope. It is the silent architect of our emotions, the invisible scriptwriter of our days. But in the end, reality is not bound to it. Reality will always move on its own terms, beyond imagination, beyond assumption. And when it does, we are left with a choice. Cling to the shattered pieces of our expectations, or release them and adapt. Perhaps wisdom lies not in predicting the world perfectly, but in accepting that the framework is only ever provisional, a story we tell ourselves until the truth arrives. That is the expectation framework. Treating assumptions as certainty, until reality reminds us that certainty belongs only to itself. Identity costume. We all wear costumes, though not of fabric or thread. They are woven from words, gestures, choices, and masks we put on for others. At first, the costume feels separate from us, a performance, an act, something that can be removed when the day ends. But what happens when we wear it too long? When the seams of the mask fuse with the skin beneath, the costume ceases to be disguise. It becomes identity. We become the role we once pretended to play. Psychologists call it internalization, the slow transformation of performance into belief. You start by adopting a persona to fit expectations, confident at work, agreeable in conversation, stoic under stress. At first, you know it is an act. But repetition etches grooves in the mind. Neural pathways strengthen. Behavior becomes habit. And habit becomes self. The mask begins to whisper louder than your inner voice, until at last the voice and the mask are the same. It is not just individuals. Entire societies are built on identity costumes. Soldiers become warriors not merely because they fight, but because the costume of uniform and ritual reshapes how they think of themselves. Priests, doctors, actors, leaders, roles so deeply performed they dissolve the line between duty and essence. You do not just act the role. You are the role. Remove the costume and you are left wondering whether anything beneath was ever real. There is danger in this transformation. Suppose you put on a mask of strength, hiding fear, hiding weakness. Over time, the mask convinces not just others but you. You no longer admit the tremble of your hands, the anxiety in your chest. You forget how to feel without the costume's armor. But when cracks appear, when the mask is torn, the collapse is shattering. Because you no longer know who you are without it. And yet, there is power too. Costumes allow reinvention. A timid person may wear the costume of boldness, and in time, truly become bold. A scattered mind may wear the costume of discipline, until discipline becomes second nature. In this way, identity is not fixed, it is fluid, performed into existence. We become what we persistently pretend to be. The costume, worn long enough, is no longer costume at all. This is why actors often describe losing themselves in roles. A performance, lived with intensity, can imprint itself onto the psyche. The character bleeds into the actor's own identity, leaving echoes long after the curtain falls. But outside the theater, the same is true of daily life. The professional mask, the social mask, the digital persona. We wear them so long that we forget the moment we first tied the strings. The illusion becomes indistinguishable from the self. Philosophers have asked for centuries, is there such a thing as an authentic self beneath the costumes? Or is identity always performance, always layered masks upon masks? Perhaps authenticity itself is just the mask we've worn the longest, the one that feels most natural because we can no longer remember what lies underneath. Think of the child who plays pretend. She dons the costume of a queen, a warrior, an explorer. At first, it is a game. But the imagination is powerful. The costume becomes reality in her mind, shaping her confidence, shaping her dreams. Years later, she may live the echoes of those roles, not knowing that what feels like destiny began as play. The game became identity. The costume became self. There is something both haunting and liberating in this. If identity is costume, then we are never trapped. We can always change roles. We can shed one mask for another, rewrite the script, choose a new costume and step into it until it feels like truth. The danger is forgetting that this power exists, believing that the current costume is the only possible one, forgetting that the seams can be loosened, the strings untied. But no matter how aware we are, the merging still happens. We become the stories we tell about ourselves. Tell a lie long enough, and it carves itself into your reality. Tell a truth often enough, and it becomes myth. Identity is not discovered, it is rehearsed. And rehearsal never ends. So ask yourself, who are you when the costume is removed? Do you even know? Or is the removal impossible, because the mask has fused with the flesh? Perhaps the answer is that there is no difference. Perhaps you are not the face beneath the mask, nor the mask itself, but the act of wearing. The shifting, adapting, endless performance of self. In the end, the line between performance and authenticity dissolves. The persona becomes indistinguishable from the person. What began as costume becomes reality. And what began as pretense becomes truth. We are all actors in roles we forget we chose, witnesses to our own transformation, sculptors of selves we did not realize we were shaping. Identity is not found. Identity is worn. And in the quiet hours, when you wonder who you really are, the haunting answer may be this: you are the costume. Market confidence myth. Imagine a marketplace, not of goods and coins, but of belief. Here, prices rise and fall not only on the weight of numbers, but on the shifting tides of confidence. The market confidence myth is this: investors often move not because of what is, but because of what they believe will be. A whisper of optimism can send stocks soaring. A flicker of doubt can pull them into collapse. In this theater, psychology is as powerful as profit, and markets move to the rhythm of perception as much as reality. Consider a rally on Wall Street. A few strong earnings reports spark enthusiasm. Headlines proclaim growth, analysts predict momentum, and investors, sensing opportunity, pour in. Their collective buying lifts prices. Rising prices confirm their optimism. Confidence feeds on itself, and soon the market appears unstoppable. Yet nothing mystical has occurred. Belief created demand, demand created price, and price reinforced belief. The rally is real, but its root is psychological momentum. Now reverse the story. A rumor spreads of instability, a company teetering, a downturn looming. Investors hesitate. Some sell to protect themselves. The decline rattles others, who sell as well. Fear snowballs, and prices tumble. Once again, it is not the fundamentals alone that dictate movement, but the shared psychology of the crowd. Panic becomes prophecy, and the market obeys. Economists call this reflexivity, the feedback loop where perception influences action, and action alters perception. The market does not merely reflect value, it helps create it. Belief shapes behavior, and behavior reshapes belief. A fragile equilibrium sustained by collective trust. History offers dramatic examples. In the late 1920s, soaring confidence built a bubble that seemed unbreakable, until doubt cracked it, and belief flipped into fear. The Great Depression followed. Decades later, in 2008, mortgage-backed securities were propped up by trust in endless housing growth. When that trust faltered, the illusion collapsed, triggering global crisis. In both cases, belief was not an accessory to markets, it was the engine itself. And yet, the market confidence myth is not only destructive. It also enables resilience. After crashes, when confidence slowly returns, investors dare to believe again. That belief fuels recovery. It is why stimulus packages and central bank policies often focus less on immediate numbers and more on restoring trust. If people believe the market will survive, they behave as though it will. And in behaving so, they make it true. Think of the market, then, as a mirror maze. Every investor looks not just at reality, but at how they think others will see it. A stock's price is not only about earnings, it is about expectations of expectations, reflections of reflections. The value lies not only in the company's books, but in the collective imagination of millions of minds. And beneath it all is the simple truth: the market runs on confidence. Strip it away, and even strong institutions falter. Nurture it, and even fragile systems endure. The myth is not that confidence matters. It is that confidence alone, at times, can outweigh every other measure. So when the market surges, ask yourself, is this growth or belief in growth? When it collapses, ask, is this loss or fear of loss? The market confidence myth reminds us that finance is not only numbers on a page, it is the psychology of trust, the weight of rumor, the momentum of crowds. A vast experiment where billions of decisions, fueled by nothing more than expectation, sculpt the fate of economies. Media feedback reality. Imagine a mirror that not only reflects reality but bends it, distorts it, then convinces you that its reflection was truth all along. That is the media feedback loop, a strange cycle where coverage does not simply report events, it shapes them, and then points back to those shaped events as justification for its own narrative. It is not only describing the world but sculpting it, guiding public thought, and even the actions of leaders until the story becomes the cause, and the cause becomes the story. Take politics as an example. A candidate might receive constant coverage for being the front runner. News channels repeat this label until it feels like fact. Polls respond, donors respond, voters respond. Suddenly the candidate actually is the frontrunner, not because they always were, but because the coverage made it so. Then the media returns and says, "Look, we were right, this person is leading." The reflection created the reality, and the reality justifies the reflection. What began as speculation became destiny, and no one notices the feedback loop pulling the strings. It happens in crises too. A protest covered as violent, even if only one moment turned chaotic, becomes remembered as violence itself. The coverage heightens fear, governments respond with force, and in that escalation, the next protest really does grow more violent. The narrative prepared the stage for its own fulfillment. Or consider economic panic. If news headlines scream about recession, markets tremble, investors pull back, consumers hesitate. The fear creates the very downturn the headlines predicted. The media reflects panic, society reacts, and the reflection becomes real. This feedback is not just political or economic. It bleeds into culture, identity, even how individuals are seen. Think of celebrities and scandals. A rumor covered repeatedly begins to shape perception, forcing responses, apologies, denials. Those reactions themselves generate more coverage, and the cycle feeds on itself until the rumor, whether true or not, becomes part of the person's identity in public memory. It is not evidence that makes it true but repetition. The loop locks them inside an image sculpted by coverage. The danger is subtle. We imagine media as a window, neutral glass through which we observe the world. But windows can be tinted. They can be angled. They can be mirrors disguised as panes. The more we watch, the more we forget that what we see is not the event itself but a mediated version that shapes how the event unfolds. A riot is a riot because cameras framed it as one. A victory is a victory because headlines announced it. Even silence, the absence of coverage, shapes reality, because what goes unspoken is erased from the collective mind. History offers countless examples. During wars, newspapers and broadcasts amplify certain victories, bury defeats, and in doing so, they not only shape morale but also influence strategies of generals and politicians. Coverage feeds action. Action feeds coverage. During financial crashes, like the 1929 Wall Street collapse or the 2008 crisis, media cycles of fear intensified the freefall, pulling more people into panic than raw numbers ever could have achieved. And in our digital age, social media accelerates this loop to seconds. A tweet sparks coverage, coverage fuels reaction, reaction spawns more tweets, and the cycle spins until perception overwhelms fact. But perhaps the most unsettling truth is how this loop sculpts individual minds. When we hear the same narrative again and again, we begin to embody it. A country told it is divided becomes more divided. A community told it is dangerous begins to live under suspicion. A person labeled untrustworthy may internalize it, shaping their choices until they fulfill the role cast upon them. It is not manipulation in the crude sense. It is subtler, a mirror reflecting us until we slowly change to match the image. So what does this mean for us as witnesses? It means we are never only observers. We are participants, drawn into a loop where our reactions feed back into the story. Every time we share an article, retweet a headline, echo a phrase, we are adding weight to the loop, sculpting the reality we will live in tomorrow. It means that coverage is not merely something to consume, it is something that consumes us, pulling us into its cycles until we forget that reality outside the loop may look very different. The media feedback reality is both powerful and perilous. It explains how rumors become history, how fear becomes fact, how predictions create futures. It shows us that the line between describing and creating is far thinner than we ever imagined. The reflection is not passive, it is generative. It builds the very world it claims to show. And so, the next time you see a headline, ask yourself, is this reality, or is it the shaping of reality? Is this a mirror, or is it a sculptor? For if coverage creates events that then justify coverage, then truth itself is caught in the loop. What we believe, what we fear, what we celebrate, all of it becomes clay molded not only by what happened, but by how it was told. And the loop never stops. It turns endlessly, a wheel grinding raw possibility into solid narrative, until even the silence between words has the power to create the world we think we see. Prediction authority. There is a peculiar power in prediction. Spoken words, written prophecies, scientific forecasts, these are not merely attempts to glimpse the future. Sometimes, they shape it. Sometimes, the act of declaring what will happen becomes the very force that brings it about. This is the paradox of prediction authority. A prophecy, once believed, can bend human action until the prediction fulfills itself. The future is not foretold, it is constructed, piece by piece, by those who believe they are merely witnessing destiny unfold. History is filled with examples. In the ancient world, the Oracle of Delphi spoke in riddles that kings and generals interpreted as divine truth. A warning given in prophecy would often drive rulers to act differently, to attack or to defend, to move armies or forge alliances. And in doing so, they often created the very outcome they were warned about. When Croesus, king of Lydia, was told that if he went to war he would destroy a great empire, he marched with confidence, believing it meant the fall of his enemies. Instead, he destroyed his own. The prediction was true, not because the gods dictated it, but because Croesus acted as though it must be. His belief built the pathway to ruin. This pattern repeats even in the modern age, though cloaked in the language of science, economics, and politics. Consider financial markets. If a respected analyst declares that a currency will collapse, investors panic, pulling out funds. That panic itself causes the collapse, fulfilling the prediction. The prophecy of loss becomes the engine of loss. Or in politics, when a poll claims one candidate is destined to win, many voters are swayed to support the inevitable, and others lose motivation to vote at all. The prediction sculpts reality, not by describing it, but by nudging behavior until reality matches the forecast. Psychologists call this the self-fulfilling prophecy. Expectations shape perception, and perception shapes action. In classrooms, teachers who are told certain children are gifted begin treating them as though they are. The children, in turn, respond to that treatment, growing into the expectations placed upon them. The prediction becomes the truth, even if the original label was arbitrary. In experiments, people labeled as more aggressive or more docile will often behave in line with that label, not because it was true at the start, but because authority gave it weight. Belief reshapes being. This reveals a strange fragility in reality. It is not just what happens that matters, but what people believe will happen. A prediction acts like a script, and once enough people read the script, they perform it. Entire societies can become trapped in these loops. When people say a recession is coming, they tighten spending, businesses cut jobs, demand falls, and a recession arrives. When people say a technology will transform the world, money and talent rush toward it, and it transforms the world precisely because it was believed in. But the paradox deepens. Not all predictions are empowering. Some are cages. If a society convinces itself that conflict is inevitable, it arms itself, prepares for war, treats neighbors with suspicion, and in time conflict does come, engineered by fear masquerading as foresight. If people predict decline, they may stop investing in hope, hastening the very decay they dread. This is the danger of prediction authority. It does not discriminate between the positive and the destructive. It only amplifies belief. The stronger the belief, the more likely the prophecy becomes reality. And yet, there is also beauty in this power. Not all prophecies must bind us to ruin. Positive predictions, when spoken with conviction, can call new realities into being. When visionaries predict cures for disease, voyages to the stars, or revolutions in human freedom, those who believe are inspired to work toward that future. The prediction becomes a seed, planted in collective imagination, watered by action until it bears fruit. In this way, humanity has always walked forward, imagining what could be, declaring it as what will be, and then building it into being. What does this mean for us now? It means that the stories we tell about the future carry immense weight. Every forecast, every warning, every promise has the potential to bend behavior, to steer decisions, to shape what comes next. Reality does not passively unfold, it is entangled with belief, stitched together by the expectations we place upon it. If enough people accept a prophecy, it ceases to be prophecy at all. It becomes instruction. So the question is not whether predictions come true. The question is, whose predictions are we following, and what kind of future are they compelling us to build? Are we chained by prophecies of fear, repeating cycles of conflict because we assume they are inevitable? Or are we daring to believe in prophecies of progress, shaping futures that would not exist without our faith? The paradox of prediction authority is that the future is not waiting to be revealed, it is waiting to be created. Every forecast, every myth, every prophecy is an invitation. And the moment we believe it, we begin to write it into reality. The authority of prediction lies not in knowing the future, but in convincing others to live as if the future is already decided. And when they do, it becomes so. National destiny script. Nations do not only run on laws, armies, or economies. They run on stories. Stories told so often, with such conviction, that they begin to feel like truth. Stories that describe not just what a country is, but what it is meant to become. This is the national destiny script, the narrative of inevitability, a patriotic fiction so deeply woven into culture that it guides decisions, shapes policies, and drives generations, as if the path of a nation were written long before its people ever chose it. Every empire has carried such a script. Ancient Rome believed it was chosen by the gods to civilize the world, that conquest was not only possible, but destined. Centuries later, European powers wrote themselves into a narrative of divine right and manifest destiny, convincing millions that expansion was not a choice but an obligation. In America, the myth of manifest destiny painted westward expansion as preordained, erasing the violence behind it under the glow of inevitability. In each case, the script was not neutral. It was patriotic fiction, written to justify ambition, disguise brutality, and lend legitimacy to power. The power of the national destiny script is that it does not feel like invention. It feels like fate. Children learn it in schoolbooks. Citizens breathe it in songs, flags, monuments. Leaders speak it in speeches that tremble with grandeur. Over time, the fiction becomes a framework. Policy no longer asks, "Is this wise?" It asks, "Does this align with destiny?" Wars are fought not just for land, but for the story that land completes. Economies are built not just on resources, but on the narrative of progress a nation insists belongs to it. Psychology plays its role. People long for purpose, for belonging inside a story greater than themselves. When that story is fused with patriotism, it becomes intoxicating. To doubt the script feels like betrayal, while to believe it feels like honor. It transforms sacrifice into duty, conquest into destiny, policy into prophecy. And like any script, once written, it directs behavior. A nation convinced of its inevitable greatness will act recklessly to prove it. A nation convinced of its eternal victimhood will act defensively, even destructively, to protect itself. The story writes the choices, even when reality resists. But history is filled with the cracks. Rome did not last forever. Empires fell. Borders shifted. Myths dissolved under the weight of famine, rebellion, and time. The script may promise inevitability, but reality never guarantees it. Yet even in collapse, the story lingers. Generations later, people still invoke lost empires, speaking of revival, restoration, rebirth. The script survives like an echo, waiting for a stage to rise again. In the modern world, the national destiny script is subtler, but no less powerful. Politicians still speak of chosen missions, of inevitable futures, of sacred duties written into history. Nations still frame their economic strategies, their military actions, their cultural policies as the unfolding of something larger than choice. The fiction persists because it serves. It unites fractured populations under a single banner. It turns uncertainty into certainty. It offers the comfort of inevitability in a world where nothing is guaranteed. And yet, this comfort carries danger. When nations treat fiction as fate, they stop questioning. Policy becomes prophecy, and dissent becomes heresy. Wars erupt because leaders believe history has already promised them victory. Citizens surrender freedoms because they are told destiny requires sacrifice. Entire generations march under banners painted with illusions. And when reality finally contradicts the script, when defeat arrives, when collapse comes, the dissonance shatters not just governments, but identities. People do not simply lose a war, they lose the story of who they believed they were. But perhaps the most haunting truth is that the national destiny script is not confined to any one country. It is a universal pattern. Every nation tells itself a story. Some scripts are triumphalist, promising eternal greatness. Others are tragic, convincing people they are forever victims. Some are righteous, claiming divine guidance. Others are pragmatic, painting themselves as chosen survivors. But in every case, the story influences reality. Fiction bends policy. Myth shapes history. The imagined future becomes the blueprint of the present. So what, then, is the lesson? It is not that nations should abandon stories, because without them, no people can unite. The lesson is awareness. To recognize that the script is a tool, not a prophecy. To remember that patriotic fiction is not fate, but choice. That the stories we tell about destiny are mirrors, not commandments. A nation that understands this can use its myths wisely, drawing strength from them without becoming enslaved to them. A nation that forgets risks walking blind into wars, collapses, and tragedies written not by reality, but by imagination mistaken for fate. The national destiny script is powerful, intoxicating, dangerous, and necessary. It shapes the rise of nations, and it haunts their fall. It is a fiction that becomes real by belief alone. And in the end, perhaps that is the deepest truth of all, that the future is never written, but if enough people believe that it is, they will act as though destiny has already chosen its path. Reputation prison. Reputation is a shadow that moves faster than you do. A single word, a single story, a single moment can attach itself to you, and once it does, it becomes the lens through which all others see. You may try to move beyond it, you may try to shed it, but it follows, clinging tighter than truth. This is the reputation prison, a cage not made of iron or stone, but of perception, where a single public label dictates every future interaction. It begins simply. A rumor, a mistake, a single judgment passed in a room you may not even enter. Someone names you selfish, unreliable, arrogant, dishonest. Or perhaps the opposite, loyal, pure, perfect, untouchable. Labels, once given, become anchors. They fix you in place, reducing the complexity of who you are to a single word. No one can see beyond it. Your actions, no matter how nuanced, are interpreted through the bars of that one label. If you succeed, it is luck. If you fail, it is proof. If you act kindly, it is dismissed. If you stumble, it is amplified. The label filters all. Psychologists call this labeling theory, the idea that identity is shaped not only from within, but by the words society stamps upon you. A criminal record brands someone as dangerous, and every future act is judged through that lens, even acts of kindness. A child called stupid begins to believe it, even when their curiosity glows. A leader praised as visionary may never be questioned, even when their vision falters. The prison works in both directions, chaining people not only to shame, but also to praise that becomes just as suffocating. What makes reputation so powerful is not just the label itself, but its permanence. Words echo longer than actions. 1,000 good deeds may be erased by one mistake if the mistake becomes the louder story. And once it takes root, the label is contagious. Others repeat it, amplify it, spread it, until it hardens into identity. You may know yourself differently, but in the eyes of the world, you are no longer a person. You are the label. There is cruelty in this reduction. A human life is endless complexity, a shifting mosaic of choices, contradictions, and growth. Yet society prefers simplicity. A single story is easier to remember than a tangled one. So we compress each other into caricatures, forgetting the rest. You become the villain, the hero, the fool, the liar, and nothing more. Reputation becomes prison when it closes off possibility. If you are labeled failure, doors close before you knock. If you are labeled genius, you are never allowed to falter. If you are labeled dangerous, kindness is ignored. If you are labeled perfect, your flaws are denied until they erupt. The label denies you the right to evolve. You are frozen in the story someone else wrote, replaying it endlessly in the eyes of those who believe it. And yet, reputation is not entirely false. It grows from seeds of action, from fragments of truth. The prison is built from bricks you may have laid yourself, sometimes in a moment of weakness, sometimes in a moment of pride. But once the walls rise, they cannot be dismantled easily. Forgiveness is slow. Rewriting is harder than writing. The shadow resists the light. Think of history's figures remembered by a single word: traitor, martyr, tyrant, saint. How many lives were more complicated than the label carved on their memory? And yet, that is what survives. In the end, even memory itself is a prison of reputation. The dead cannot protest, cannot correct, cannot expand. They are remembered as only one thing, forever. But here is the deeper tragedy. Sometimes the label not only shapes how others see you, it shapes how you see yourself. Wear a mask long enough, and you begin to believe it. Hear yourself called worthless or brilliant often enough, and the word carves pathways in your brain. You become prisoner and guard at once, enforcing the sentence upon yourself, even when no one is watching. Is there escape from the reputation prison? Perhaps only partially. New circles can be found, new audiences who have not heard the old label. Time can erode the edges of memory. And sometimes, defiance itself becomes freedom, the choice to live beyond the word, even if the world refuses to see. Yet the bars are never entirely gone. A reputation once cast never vanishes completely. It lingers, ready to be invoked, ready to remind, ready to reduce. To be human, then, is to live within reputation's paradox. We crave recognition, yet fear judgment. We build reputations to protect ourselves, yet are trapped by them when they grow too rigid. We are more than the labels we wear, yet we cannot live entirely without them. The prison stands, but so does the self within it. Larger, deeper, infinitely more complex than any word can contain. So when you hear a name reduced to a single label, pause. Remember the prison. Remember that you, too, are more than the story told about you. And perhaps, in that pause, you will glimpse the truth, that reputation may dictate perception, but it never fully captures reality. Behind every label is a person still unseen, waiting to be known beyond the bars of their reputation. Goal visioning effect. Goal visioning effect. Close your eyes and imagine a future version of yourself. See the details not in vague outlines, but in sharp color. The room around you, the clothes you wear, the exact feeling in your chest as you reach the goal you desire. Perhaps it is standing on a stage receiving recognition, perhaps it is crossing the finish line of a marathon, perhaps it is holding the book you wrote with your own hands. The moment is not real, not yet, but to your brain, vivid imagination is more than fantasy. It is rehearsal. It is preparation. It is a compass that bends choices quietly, again and again, until the imagined becomes the lived. This is the goal visioning effect, the power of mental imagery to alter behavior until a goal is achieved. Neuroscience shows us why. When you vividly imagine performing an action, the same neural pathways activate as when you actually do it. The sprinter who closes their eyes and pictures the sound of the gun, the tightening of muscles, the explosion off the starting blocks, those signals light up the motor cortex almost identically to real movement. The brain rehearses the act before the body does. And when the time comes to perform, the mind is not facing something unknown. It has already been there. It has already run the script. The body simply follows. But this effect is not limited to athletics. Students who picture themselves calmly taking an exam, seeing the paper, writing with confidence, often perform better. Public speakers who rehearse in their mind not only words, but the feeling of presence and control, reduce anxiety and speak with greater clarity. Astronauts in training use guided imagery to prepare for missions they cannot yet physically attempt. Floating in microgravity, adjusting controls, moving deliberately in a weightless cockpit. Imagination becomes training, and training becomes action. The mechanism is subtle but powerful. By vividly imagining the destination, you alter the small choices on the path. Someone who pictures themselves as healthy may choose fruit over junk food without conscious effort. A person who envisions financial independence may decline impulsive spending because the image of their future self is more real than the temptation in front of them. The brain, craving consistency between belief and action, nudges behavior toward alignment. 1,000 small nudges, repeated over time, transform the path itself. And there is a deeper layer. Vivid goals change identity. It is one thing to say, "I want to run a marathon." It is another to picture yourself as a runner, lacing shoes at dawn, logging miles, feeling the steady rhythm of breath and stride. The imagined goal becomes part of who you are, not just something you chase. Habits then grow naturally from identity. You act in accordance with the person you already see yourself to be. The vision of the goal does not merely inspire, it reshapes the self. Yet, the goal visioning effect carries danger too. Imagination can seduce us into thinking we are further along than we are. Fantasizing about success without attaching action creates a false reward, dopamine for a victory not yet earned. Some people spend years picturing dreams without planting a single step in reality. The mind confuses vision with progress, and progress stalls. The true power of goal visioning lies not in dreaming, but in pairing dream with discipline, image with incremental effort. Think of it as a lighthouse. The light alone does not move the ship, but it provides direction, a constant reference in the dark. Every adjustment of the wheel, every small correction, is made in its glow. Without the light, the sea is endless and disorienting. With it, the journey gains shape. The vivid image of the goal is that lighthouse. It does not get you there by itself, but it keeps you aligned, keeps you steady, keeps you moving even through storms. History is filled with examples. Thomas Edison saw the electric light in his mind before he could make it real. Every failed filament was not failure, but refinement guided by a vivid picture of a glowing bulb. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke not only of laws and policies, but of a dream, a vision so vivid it reshaped the choices of millions. NASA's Apollo program was fueled not just by technology, but by a picture of a human footprint on the moon, imagined before it ever existed. The image preceded the reality. The vision bent choices until the prophecy fulfilled itself. So what does this mean for you? It means the story you imagine matters. The clearer the picture, the stronger its pull. If your vision is faint, your choices scatter. But if you can see it vividly, down to the details of light, sound, and feeling, it becomes magnetic. Every decision begins to orbit around it. Your brain does not argue with the image, it tries to live it. We live in a universe where entropy scatters order, where uncertainty defines the future. And yet, within our own minds, we hold a counterforce, the ability to picture order before it exists, and then act until it does. The goal visioning effect is not magic. It is not instant. It is the quiet power of imagination steering action, of vision sculpting destiny. So tonight, when you close your eyes, do not just wish. Picture. See the details. Live them in advance. And then, when you wake, let your choices follow the script you already wrote. One day, you will open your eyes and realize the vision you held so vividly has become the life you inhabit. The future you imagined has been waiting all along, waiting for you to believe in it vividly enough to bring it true. White heavy checkmark. This narration is 460 characters, calibrated for 5 to 6 minutes of voiceover in your Rex. Placebo Worldview. Imagine swallowing a pill with no active ingredient, nothing but sugar and chalk. Logic says nothing should happen. Yet hours later, pain fades, anxiety calms, energy returns. This is the placebo effect, the strange power of belief creating the very results it expects. But the illusion does not stop at medicine. It seeps into the way we see the entire world. A placebo worldview, where what we believe becomes what we experience, may quietly shape our lives more than any hidden chemical ever could. The mechanism is not magic, it is expectation. When we believe a remedy works, our brain and body respond as though it does. Endorphins release. Neural pathways calm. Stress hormones lower. Measurable changes ripple through the system, born not from the pill but from conviction. The belief is the trigger, and the body follows. It is reality sculpted by perception, a self-fulfilling prophecy disguised as treatment. But what if this principle extends beyond medicine? What if the way we frame the world, the stories we repeat to ourselves, are placebos in their own right? A person who believes the world is hostile may experience hostility everywhere they turn, filtering every neutral glance into suspicion, every silence into rejection. Another who believes the world is generous may find kindness more often, not because the world has changed, but because their expectation sculpts their perception and guides their actions toward those outcomes. Belief, like the sugar pill, generates the reality it predicts. Psychologists have seen this in classrooms. When teachers are told certain students are gifted, those students tend to perform better, even if the label was random. The teacher's belief alters their behavior. More attention, more encouragement, more patience. The students absorb this and rise to meet the expectation. The placebo is not in the blood but in the mind, weaving into daily life until thought becomes destiny. It appears in medicine, in relationships, in culture, in history itself. Societies that believe they are cursed may falter, collapsing under the weight of that conviction. Nations told they are destined to rise often shape policies and ambitions to make it so. Whole civilizations can be driven by collective placebos, beliefs so strong they carve roads, build monuments, ignite wars, and fuel renaissances. The placebo worldview is not a trick of biology. It is the engine of history. And yet, this power is double-edged. Belief can heal, but it can also harm. A nocebo effect, the dark twin of the placebo, shows that believing in danger can cause suffering even when no threat exists. A patient warned of side effects may experience them, even from a harmless pill. A society convinced it is doomed may sabotage itself into collapse. The mind not only writes cures into the body, it writes poison too. So what does this mean for us? It means that every story we tell ourselves is medicine. Every belief we accept is a pill we swallow, shaping what comes next. Cynicism, hope, despair, resilience, each becomes a prescription for reality. To live inside a placebo worldview is to live in a hall of mirrors, where faith in the reflection slowly changes the face itself. Think of the implications. If we believe we are powerless, we will act with hesitation, and opportunities will slip away, confirming the belief. If we believe we are capable, we will take risks, open doors, endure failures, and eventually succeed, again confirming the belief. The placebo is not deception. It is direction. It is the compass by which thought steers reality, even if the needle was imagined in the first place. The placebo worldview does not mean truth is irrelevant. Gravity does not vanish if we disbelieve it. Disease does not cure itself by denial. But it does mean that between raw fact and lived experience lies a filter of expectation. And through that filter, our futures bend. The sugar pill heals not because it contains medicine, but because we believed it could. The world itself becomes our pill, and what we expect of it, we may receive. So when you look at the stories you live by, ask, what remedies am I taking without knowing? Which of my fears are nocebos, shaping pain out of shadows? Which of my hopes are placebos, shaping strength out of nothing? The mind, fragile and brilliant, carries within it the power to sculpt not only health but reality itself. And in that sense, every worldview is a prescription, every belief a treatment, every expectation a quiet architect of the life we will eventually live. Threat narrative trap. There is a strange and dangerous pattern in human history. When people invent a threat, the fear of that imagined danger can summon real consequences. Armies are raised, walls are built, alliances are forged, and sometimes wars are fought, not because the threat ever truly existed, but because people believed it did. This is the threat narrative trap, where an invented danger drives real defensive action, and those defensive actions themselves create the very conflict that was once only imagined. Fear becomes prophecy. Suspicion becomes reality. Fiction becomes fact. Consider the Salem witch trials of the 17th century. There were no actual witches commanding dark powers in the town. But the belief that they might exist was enough to tear the community apart. Neighbors turned on neighbors. Innocent people were accused, imprisoned, executed. The threat was invented, but the fear was real, and the damage was catastrophic. The imagined enemy produced very real victims. On a larger scale, entire nations have fallen into the same trap. During the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union feared annihilation at the hands of the other. Each side told itself stories of imminent invasion, secret plots, and unstoppable weapons. To counter those imagined dangers, they built arsenals capable of destroying the world many times over. They stationed troops, launched spies, fought proxy wars. In the end, much of the danger each side feared existed only in narrative, but the actions born from those narratives created genuine hostility, instability, and near disaster. The fear of war came so close to becoming the war itself. The psychology behind this is simple, but devastating. Humans evolved to react to threats, even imagined ones. If we hear rustling in the grass, it is safer to assume a predator than to dismiss it as wind. But scaled up into cultures and nations, that instinct breeds cycles of paranoia. Leaders invoke shadowy enemies, conspiracies, infiltrators, hidden powers, and people rally in fear. Defenses are built. Preemptive strikes are launched. In time, other groups, feeling threatened by these aggressive moves, begin to respond in kind. The threat narrative becomes a self-fulfilling loop, escalating until the fiction produces reality. The trap is not confined to politics or war. It operates in social life, too. Rumors of betrayal can destroy relationships, even when no betrayal occurred. Suspicion in a community can lead to division, even when no one was guilty of wrongdoing. The fear of collapse can collapse economies, as investors pull out funds and create the panic they hoped to avoid. In each case, the threat is a ghost, but the damage it causes is tangible. Perhaps the most unsettling truth is that threat narratives are often deliberately created. Rulers, movements, and organizations have long known that people unify most easily when they share a common enemy. If no enemy exists, one can be invented. History is filled with scapegoats, groups blamed for disasters, accused of secret control, demonized as existential dangers. Those narratives rally populations, strengthen power, and justify violence. And once the narrative takes root, it becomes nearly impossible to dislodge, because fear resists logic. People act as though the danger is real, and in acting, they make it real. This is why the threat narrative trap is so powerful. It is not just a story told, it is a story lived. The imagined danger reshapes reality, carving out new borders, fueling new conflicts, leaving scars that last for generations. Wars fought over false fears still kill real soldiers. Walls built to keep out phantom enemies still divide real families. Economies destabilized by rumors still ruin real lives. The trap is not that the threats exist, but that the responses to them create consequences indistinguishable from what was once only feared. And yet, there is also a paradox here. Because threat narratives can summon reality, they can also blind us to genuine dangers. While societies fixate on invented enemies, they may ignore the real crises, environmental collapse, disease, inequality, that quietly grow in the shadows. In chasing ghosts, we leave ourselves unguarded against what is truly coming. So the question becomes, how many of our defenses, our conflicts, our divisions are born not from truth, but from stories we tell ourselves about what might be? How often are we fighting shadows, and in fighting them, giving them substance? The threat narrative trap shows us that danger is not always external. It often begins in imagination. And imagination, when armed, can wound just as deeply as reality. We live, then, in a world where threats can be invented at will, where fear itself can be weaponized. The true peril is not just the enemies we face, but the stories that make us believe we must fight them. For when the story is believed, the battle begins, and when the battle begins, the story has already won. Scarcity Story. Scarcity is not always born from reality. Sometimes, it is born from story. A whisper that supplies are running low. A headline that shelves may soon be empty. A rumor passed from one mouth to another until belief spreads faster than fact. And once enough people believe, the shortage becomes real. This is the scarcity story, when imagined lack creates actual lack, when panic transforms abundance into emptiness. We've seen it play out again and again. A storm approaches, and suddenly every supermarket is stripped of bread, water, and batteries. A rumor of fuel disruption spreads, and within hours, gas stations overflow with desperate drivers. Toilet paper, infant formula, medicine, items that were plentiful yesterday vanish overnight, not because supply collapsed, but because fear rewrote behavior. Scarcity begins in perception, and perception makes it real. Psychology explains the cycle. Humans are wired for survival, and survival depends on anticipation. If we hear that something essential may run out, we prepare by hoarding. But the very act of hoarding causes the shortage. The shelves empty because everyone grabs more than they need. Fear becomes prophecy, and the prophecy fulfills itself. The scarcity story is not a reflection of reality, it is the creation of a new one. History offers striking examples. During World War II, governments rationed goods like sugar and meat, not always because supplies were gone, but because the belief in scarcity risked spiraling into chaos. In the 1970s oil crisis, panic buying of gasoline led to endless lines at pumps, amplifying the shortage far beyond the actual disruption in supply. In more recent memory, the early months of a global pandemic saw shelves stripped of paper goods, disinfectants, and even basic food staples, as people worldwide succumbed to the same script: better to have too much than to risk having nothing. But the scarcity story extends beyond products. It infects markets, economies, and even politics. A rumor of financial collapse can trigger bank runs, where customers rush to withdraw money. The banks fail not because they lacked reserves, but because the fear of failure drained them. Stock markets can crash on speculation alone, wiping trillions in value based not on what is, but on what people think is coming. The scarcity story is not confined to objects, it is the architecture of panic in all its forms. And there is something deeper, more haunting. Scarcity stories can be manipulated. Leaders, corporations, and media outlets know the power of fear. Suggest that a rival nation will cut off resources, and panic drives people to accept higher prices or harsher policies. Hint at an upcoming shortage, and demand spikes, inflating profit margins. Entire industries thrive on scarcity marketing, limited time only, exclusive access, while supplies last, tricking us into believing that value comes not from quality, but from threat of absence. Scarcity becomes a weapon, shaping not just consumer behavior, but political obedience. Yet, at its heart, the scarcity story reveals something fundamental about human beings. We hate uncertainty. To not know if tomorrow's shelf will be full is unbearable. So we act today, even if that action guarantees tomorrow's emptiness. We seek control in the face of chaos, but the very attempt at control magnifies the chaos. In this way, the scarcity story is not about goods, it is about trust. Trust in systems. Trust in institutions. Trust in one another. When trust falters, stories fill the gap. And those stories bend reality. Consider how this affects identity. Communities defined by plenty can unravel overnight when convinced of shortage. Neighbors who once shared become competitors. Strangers in stores glare with suspicion. Civility fractures as survival instinct overrides patience. Scarcity does not only empty shelves, it empties empathy. And yet, the opposite can also be true. Societies that recognize the scarcity story for what it is can resist it. Shared trust can calm panic. Collective action can prevent rumor from becoming reality. The story is fragile, but so is our response. So what, then, is the lesson of the scarcity story? That reality is not only built on what is, but on what we believe. That shortages are sometimes physical, but often psychological. that our imagination of lack can be more dangerous than lack itself. And that every time we act from panic rather than patience, we write the script of emptiness with our own hands. Look closely, and you'll see the pattern everywhere. Not just in groceries or gas, but in attention, in opportunity, in love, in time. We are told there is never enough to go around, never enough for everyone. And when we believe it, we hoard, we compete, we fight. And in doing so, we create the very scarcity we fear. Perhaps the way forward is not to deny scarcity, but to see through its stories. To ask, is the shortage real, or is it created by our fear of it? To recognize when we are actors in a play written by rumor. To remember that abundance and scarcity are not just conditions of supply, but conditions of mind. That is the scarcity story. A whisper of lack that grows into panic, until shelves are bare, tanks are empty, and trust dissolves. Not because the world ran out, but because we believed it would. Character archetype lock. We are storytellers by nature. To understand the chaos of life, we reach for patterns, roles, archetypes. We cast heroes and villains, fools and mentors, outcasts and saviors. And in doing so, we do not only shape our myths, we shape each other. The character archetype lock is the prison of narrative, where real people are forced into fictional molds until they begin to live them. It begins subtly. A child praised as the smart one soon feels the weight of always needing to be clever, always needing to know. Another, labeled the troublemaker, finds every mistake amplified, every action interpreted as rebellion. The roles harden, and what was once description becomes prescription. You do not just call them the archetype, they become it. Society thrives on these stories. The charismatic leader is expected to be fearless, so their doubts vanish into silence. The nurturing friend is expected to be endlessly giving, so their exhaustion is ignored. The cold genius is expected to lack empathy, so even their kindness is dismissed as out of character. Each archetype is a mask welded to the face, locking a human being into a role that is easier for others to understand but cruel in its confinement. What makes the lock so powerful is not just the story others tell, it is the story the person begins to tell themselves. Identity is shaped by expectation. When the audience claps for the role you play, you learn the script by heart. When they recoil at any deviation, you learn never to improvise. Soon, you are no longer acting. You are the character. The archetype has replaced the person. Psychologists call this the self-fulfilling prophecy. Treat someone as a role long enough, and they will act it. Students labeled gifted often rise, while those labeled slow often stumble, not because of inherent ability, but because the script becomes reality. Employees cast as leaders begin to lead. Those cast as followers learn to wait. We do not live only in our own skins, we live in the fictions that others write for us. The irony is that archetypes come from stories, yet real life is far more complex. No one is only a hero, or only a villain, or only a fool. But simplicity seduces us. To reduce someone to an archetype makes them easier to explain, easier to control. We say, she's the mother figure, or he's the comic relief, as if these phrases capture entire lives. We cut away their contradictions, their shadows, their untold desires, until all that remains is the clean silhouette of a character. The lock clicks shut, and the story begins to play itself out. History is filled with archetype locks. Leaders remembered as tyrants, no matter their tenderness. Artists remembered as tortured, no matter their moments of joy. Revolutionaries remembered as martyrs, their complexity erased in favor of the cleaner role. Even entire nations are cast into roles, villains, victims, saviors, until their histories are flattened into myth. Reality is overwritten by narrative. But the lock does not require malice. Even love can create it. To call someone your rock or your guardian is to cast them in a role that denies their fragility. To call them your light is to deny their darkness. They may love you, but in private, they may suffocate beneath the script you gave them. The archetype that once seemed flattering becomes a cage. There is tragedy here, but also recognition. For we, too, live under archetypes others have chosen for us. Think of the labels you carry: the reliable one, the rebel, the dreamer, the disappointment. How much of your life has been shaped not by who you are, but by the part others told you to play? How much of your story is yours, and how much is the script handed to you by family, by friends, by strangers who only knew a fragment? And yet, there is danger in escaping as well. To defy the archetype is to risk rejection, confusion, even exile. People cling to their stories about you. They resist change. If you step off the stage, they may boo, not because you are false, but because their narrative has lost its coherence. You threaten the order of their understanding. And so, the archetype holds you tighter. Still, cracks are possible. Masks can slip. Scripts can be rewritten. A hero can reveal their fear. A villain can reveal their tenderness. A fool can reveal their wisdom. In those moments, the archetype is exposed for what it is. Not a destiny, but a simplification. Not a truth, but a story. And in seeing that, you may glimpse a freedom greater than the lock. The freedom to be more than a character. To be contradictory, shifting, unfinished. To be fully human. The character archetype lock is powerful, but it is not unbreakable. It is the story told too loudly, too simply, until reality bends. But beneath the roles, beneath the masks, there is always more. The person you are is not the character they write. The script may shape you, but it cannot contain you. And in the silence between lines, when the stage lights dim, the real self waits, complex, uncast, and free. Moral panic engine. Imagine a spark, small, often trivial. A rumor, a headline, a story told with enough drama to pierce fear into the collective mind. Alone, the spark is nothing. But when fear catches, when imagination magnifies the danger, a fire begins to spread. The public reacts not to what is, but to what they believe might be. Politicians notice the flame, stoke it, and harness it. Soon, laws are written, freedoms are adjusted, lives are reshaped. The original threat may never have been real, but the response becomes reality. This is the moral panic engine, fictional social threats powerful enough to drive actual policy change. History is thick with examples. In the 1980s, fears of satanic cults swept across parts of the United States. Wild accusations of ritual abuse circulated, often with no evidence. Parents panicked, schools introduced strict monitoring, courts became clogged with false testimony. Entire lives were ruined, not by actual cults, but by the belief in them. The panic wrote itself into policy. Laws stiffened around child care centers, funding was directed toward investigations, and entire communities bore the weight of a fiction made real. Go further back, and the Salem witch trials show the same pattern. Whispers of witchcraft, fueled by superstition and fear, snowballed into trials and executions. There was no epidemic of witches, no true demonic conspiracy. But fear itself became the engine. It gave lawmakers and religious leaders the justification to seize power, control behavior, and enforce conformity. The panic became a tool, reshaping society through laws etched in terror. The same cycle appears in modern times with shifting faces. Video games blamed for violence. Comic books once blamed for juvenile delinquency. Rock music accused of corrupting youth. Each time, the supposed threat was more phantom than fact. Yet hearings were held, bans were debated, censorship introduced. Fear of imagined harm left real fingerprints on legal codes and cultural rules. The psychology is simple but dangerous. Fear sharpens attention, and moral panic thrives on uncertainty. When people sense a threat to their children, their traditions, or their way of life, rational skepticism falters. They demand protection, and leaders, whether out of conviction or opportunism, deliver. The result is a feedback loop. Media amplifies the panic, the public demands action, policymakers legislate, the panic grows stronger. Fiction becomes law through the mechanics of fear. And the most insidious part? Moral panics rarely announce themselves as temporary. In the moment, they feel urgent, undeniable. Few pause to question whether the monster is real. Only decades later, in hindsight, do we see the distortion clearly. The lives lost, the freedoms curtailed, the policies shaped by shadows. What was once an undeniable threat fades into embarrassment, an artifact of fear. Yet the laws remain, etched into the structure of society long after the panic has passed. This engine runs not just on false threats, but on identity. A panic often targets an other, a group, a practice, a cultural shift framed as dangerous. Fear unites the majority against the minority, creating cohesion by pointing to a scapegoat. The group may be small, harmless, even entirely imagined. But once painted as a danger, they become the excuse for surveillance, exclusion, or punishment. The moral panic, then, is not only a reaction to fiction, it is a mechanism of power. So what does this mean for us? It means that every society must ask, what threats are real, and which are imagined? What laws are written from evidence, and which from fear? Because the moral panic engine does not need truth to run. It only needs imagination strong enough to shape behavior. And once behavior changes, once laws are written, the fiction leaves behind real consequences. Picture it as a machine. Stories enter as sparks, fear fuels the gears, policymakers pull the levers, and out comes new law, new control, new limits. The threat may never have existed outside of words, but the result is concrete: arrests, regulations, shifts in freedom. Fiction, by this engine, sculpts reality. And here is the unsettling truth: moral panics will never fully vanish. They are part of the human tendency to protect by exaggerating, to fear shadows as much as monsters. The only defense is awareness, the ability to pause, to ask whether the danger is evidence or echo, truth or tale. Because once the engine begins turning, it is difficult to stop. The moral panic engine is a reminder that stories shape societies, not just in myth or art, but in law and policy. A rumor today can become legislation tomorrow. A fear today can write itself into the freedoms of generations. Fiction may not kill witches, or conjure cults, or corrupt entire generations, but belief in that fiction can. And in that way, the engine runs on us. Pattern imposition. Imagine staring at clouds drifting across the sky. Shapes emerge: a dragon, a ship, a face. None of them were truly there, yet once you've named them, they feel undeniable. This is the mind's compulsion, to impose patterns, to find order in noise. We do it with stars, linking them into constellations. We do it with events, tying coincidences into destiny. We do it with lives, weaving scattered moments into a narrative thread. But here lies the deeper twist. Sometimes, by believing the pattern is real, we begin to act as if it is. And those actions breathe life into the illusion, until it hardens into truth. What began as a phantom becomes the shape of reality. Psychologists call this apophenia, the tendency to perceive connections in random data. See a face on Mars, hear hidden messages in static, sense conspiracies in unrelated events. Our brains are pattern machines, evolved to detect order even when none exists, because in ancient times, mistaking a shadow for a predator was safer than missing a real threat. But what happens when this survival instinct bleeds into culture, history, and identity? What happens when imagined connections steer real choices? Consider the stock market. Traders scan for signals, lines on charts, patterns in rises and falls. Many of these signals are illusions, noise interpreted as prophecy. But when enough people act on them, when enough investors buy or sell because they believe the pattern exists, the market actually shifts in that direction. The illusion becomes real through the weight of collective behavior. A phantom signal transforms into profit and loss. History is full of similar feedback loops. During medieval plagues, people sought patterns in illness, blaming certain groups, suspecting curses, interpreting comets as omens. The patterns weren't real, but the actions that followed, persecutions, panics, mass migrations, reshaped societies for centuries. In modern times, rumors spread online, patterns of conspiracy drawn from fragments. Believers act on them, protests erupt, violence ignites. The pattern was born of imagination, but action makes it reality. Even in personal life, the phenomenon lingers. A person convinced that others dislike them sees coldness in every gesture, dismissiveness in every glance. They withdraw, they grow defensive, and eventually relationships fray. The pattern they imposed at first, imagined hostility, becomes real hostility through their own response. Another person sees themselves as lucky, finding patterns of fortune in small coincidences. Their confidence grows, they take risks, opportunities multiply, and life really does bend toward luck. Belief sculpts behavior, and behavior sculpts truth. The danger and the wonder of pattern imposition is this: it creates self-fulfilling prophecies. We see meaning in randomness, we adjust our choices, and through those choices, meaning materializes. The stars were never linked, but we drew lines between them, and now constellations guide sailors across seas. The market has no voice, but we interpret its fluctuations, and entire economies move. The world may not have offered patterns, but our belief and action weave them into the fabric of lived reality. And yet, there is tragedy here. Because not all patterns deserve to be made real. False connections can fuel paranoia, hatred, violence. Entire societies can fracture over ghosts mistaken for truths. The mind's gift, the ability to weave order from chaos, becomes its curse when the patterns we impose are born of fear, bias, or delusion. Once acted upon, even the baseless can scar generations. But there is also power here. To recognize that many of the patterns we live by are illusions made solid is to realize that we are not passive witnesses, we are participants. We are sculptors of reality, sketching lines across the randomness until life aligns with them. It is both frightening and liberating. Frightening because we can trap ourselves inside illusions. Liberating because if illusions can become real through action, then hope, vision, and meaning can too. So the next time you notice yourself drawing lines between stars, ask, is this a phantom, or is this a future waiting to be built? For patterns, once believed and acted upon, no longer belong only to the imagination. They carve into reality itself, transforming coincidence into consequence. And in that sense, every story we tell, every connection we see, is not just interpretation, it is creation. Civilization myth core. At the heart of every civilization lies a story. Not just a record of events, but a myth, a tale of origins, heroes, divine mandates, or chosen destinies. These stories are not written only to entertain. They become the invisible architecture of nations, shaping how people see themselves, how they treat outsiders, how they govern, and how they justify their actions. These are civilization myth cores, foundational legends that serve as the compass of entire societies. They may not be factually true, yet they carry more power than truth, for they provide meaning, identity, and authority. And as long as people believe them, they shape the course of history. Consider Rome. Its mythic beginning was the tale of Romulus and Remus, twins abandoned by fate and raised by a she-wolf, destined to build a city that would rule the world. This story was not history, it was myth. Yet it defined Rome's self-image. Romans saw themselves as chosen, born of struggle and nurtured by destiny. Their laws, their politics, even their wars were framed as continuations of that mythic origin, a people born for greatness, bound to dominate. The legend became the operating system of an empire, instructing generations how to rule and how to see themselves as rulers. In ancient Egypt, the myth core was divine kingship. Pharaohs were not merely human leaders, they were incarnations of gods, keepers of Ma'at, the cosmic order. This story legitimized their power. To disobey the pharaoh was not just rebellion, it was blasphemy against the universe itself. The pyramids, the temples, the rituals of statecraft all flowed from this myth. Even when dynasties crumbled, the story endured, ensuring that Egypt rebuilt itself again and again under the same sacred framework. The civilization was held together not by armies alone, but by the myth that its rulers were divine. Other societies crafted their myth cores around struggle and survival. The Hebrews told the story of Exodus, a people chosen by God, freed from slavery, destined for a promised land. That myth gave cohesion to a scattered people, guiding their laws, their faith, and their endurance across centuries of exile and oppression. In the modern age, The American experiment was built on its own founding myths. Liberty wrestled from tyranny, a nation chosen to embody freedom and democracy. These stories are recited in schools, engraved in monuments, invoked in speeches. They are not just history, they are myths polished into identity. The power of a civilization myth core is that it does not remain confined to the past. It provides a script for the present. Citizens look to their myth to decide what their nation should do. Leaders invoke it to justify wars, reforms, revolutions. Sometimes it uplifts. A myth of freedom can inspire emancipation. Sometimes it corrupts. A myth of superiority can justify conquest or oppression. Myths are malleable, but they are never powerless. They are the deepest fuel of collective behavior. What makes these myths so enduring is their emotional truth. They may not describe what literally happened, but they express what a people wants to believe about itself. Myth is memory sculpted into meaning. And when meaning becomes collective, it hardens into law, ritual, and government. Even secular nations cannot escape it. Constitutions, national anthems, and civic ceremonies all echo mythic storytelling, binding individuals into a shared belief that they are part of something greater. Yet myths are double-edged. They can unify or divide, liberate or enslave. A society built on a myth of chosen destiny may expand into empire but also blind itself to its own cruelties. A people bound by mythic suffering may endure, but also live perpetually in cycles of grievance. When a myth core becomes too rigid, it traps a civilization in its own story, unable to adapt, unable to change course, even when reality demands it. This is why civilizations rise and fall not only by armies and economies, but by the stories they choose to believe. When a myth loses credibility, when the people no longer feel its pull, the civilization unravels. But when the myth is strong, it can carry a nation through centuries, even millennia. Long after monuments crumble, long after cities fall to dust, the story can still survive, waiting to be retold, waiting to inspire. So when you look at nations today, when you hear their anthems, see their flags, listen to their speeches, you are not just witnessing politics. You are hearing myth. You are seeing the ancient human instinct to bind identity to story, to anchor destiny in legend. We govern ourselves not only by law, but by narrative. And in the end, it may not be armies or technologies that define civilizations, but the myths they choose as their core. Enemy image projection. Conflict often begins not with bullets, but with imagination. A group, a nation, a people looks at another and begins to draw a picture. A picture of danger, of hostility, of threat. That picture may not reflect reality, but the more it is painted, the more convincing it becomes. And soon, the imagined enemy behaves like the enemy we expect them to be. This is enemy image projection, depicting others as threats until they finally respond in kind. The process is subtle. At first, suspicion. A neighbor is viewed as competitive, a rival is described as untrustworthy. Rumors spread, speeches echo with warning. Every action is interpreted through a lens of danger. If the other side grows quiet, it is seen as planning. If they grow loud, it is seen as aggression. Neutral gestures are twisted into evidence of hidden hostility. And with every turn of interpretation, the enemy image sharpens. History is filled with its consequences. Before the Cold War escalated, both the United States and the Soviet Union projected onto each other the image of relentless expansion, painting every move as an attempt at domination. Even defensive acts were seen as aggression. The result was a spiral, each side responding to the projected hostility of the other, until the fear became reality. The arms race was not just fueled by weapons, but by the stories each side told about the other. The image preceded the action, and the action fulfilled the image. On smaller scales, the same pattern unfolds. In communities, groups paint outsiders as dangerous, untrustworthy, corrupt. The projection justifies discrimination, which breeds resentment, which then manifests as hostility. The victim of the image, pushed into corners, eventually resists. And that resistance is then used as proof. See? We were right to fear them. The cycle becomes self-fulfilling. The projection of enemy creates the enemy it imagined. Psychology explains why this mechanism is so powerful. Humans are wired to detect threats. A rustle in the grass, a shadow in the distance. Better to assume danger and be wrong than to dismiss it and be harmed. But in modern society, this instinct scales upward. Leaders, media, and institutions exploit it, projecting danger onto others to consolidate unity at home. Nothing bonds a group faster than a common enemy. And if no enemy exists, one can be invented. Because the mind does not require proof to react, it requires only belief. The danger is that once the enemy image takes hold, it is almost impossible to dissolve. Evidence that contradicts the threat is dismissed as deception. Acts of kindness are interpreted as manipulation. The image becomes stronger than reality itself. In this way, wars are justified, oppression is excused, and violence is unleashed not against real dangers, but against reflections of fear. The enemy lives in the mind long before they live on the battlefield. But there is an even more haunting dimension. Projection does not only invent enemies, it transfers inner darkness outward. Nations struggling with corruption project that corruption onto rivals. Leaders who fear weakness project weakness onto outsiders. Communities fractured from within blame others beyond their borders. The enemy becomes a mirror, carrying traits we refuse to face in ourselves. We destroy what we cannot accept in our own reflection. And yet, there is another side to the story. Recognizing enemy image projection reveals the possibility of breaking the cycle. When we see the projection for what it is, a story, not a certainty, we gain the chance to step back. To ask, is this hostility real, or is it the echo of our fear? Is the enemy outside, or is it within the lens we use to see them? The question is not easy, because suspicion feels safer than trust. But without it, the spiral only deepens. The world continues to suffer under this pattern. Nations frame others as existential threats. Groups within societies define outsiders as dangers. Individuals project fear onto strangers. And everywhere, the same result emerges: hostility created by the expectation of hostility. A feedback loop of fear and aggression that erases the possibility of peace. The lesson of enemy image projection is not that threats never exist. Real enemies do arise, real dangers must be faced. But it is that imagination magnifies them, sometimes invents them, and often pushes us into conflict that could have been avoided. To mistake projection for truth is to become trapped in a war with shadows, until the shadows learn to strike back. So when you hear leaders speak of threats, when you see communities paint others as enemies, ask yourself, is this reality, or is this the story being told to make it reality? Because the most dangerous enemies are not always those we face across borders or barricades. They are the ones we create with our own imagination, our own fear, our own projection. That is the tragedy of the enemy image. It begins as fiction and ends as history. Unlocking potential tale. There is a strange magic in words. A phrase spoken often enough can bend the path of a life. Tell a child they are gifted, and watch how their posture shifts, how their eyes search for proof that the story is true. Tell them long enough, with enough conviction, and they may begin to live as though destiny itself demanded it. This is the unlocking potential tale, the power of belief to create the very thing it names, where a story repeated by others becomes the performance of greatness. It begins with suggestion. A teacher praises a student as brilliant, and suddenly the student studies harder, listens closer, takes risks they might have avoided. A parent insists their child is destined for achievement, and the child carries the weight of expectation like a hidden engine, pushing them forward when they might have stopped. Confidence is not born from within, it is planted from without, and it grows wild, reshaping the mind. Psychologists call this the Pygmalion effect, the self-fulfilling prophecy of expectation. When others believe in your ability, you begin to act as if that ability is real. Teachers who expect excellence unconsciously give more attention, more encouragement, more patience, and the students respond by rising to meet it. The prophecy completes itself. The label of gifted becomes a mirror held up every day, until the reflection looks back as truth. But beneath the surface, the effect is both fragile and dangerous. The tale unlocks potential, but it can also trap. For what happens when the gifted one falters? When they stumble, fail, or simply do not feel extraordinary? The story demands consistency. They must always be talented, always be successful, always live up to the label. Failure feels like betrayal, not just of themselves but of the prophecy others spoke over them. In this way, the same tale that unlocks can also chain, turning a gift into a burden. And yet, it works again and again. Across schools, across workplaces, across entire cultures, the unlocking potential tale shapes lives. A coach tells an athlete they have greatness, and the athlete trains harder than their peers. A mentor tells a young leader they have vision, and that belief fuels courage when doubt might otherwise paralyze. Belief becomes scaffolding. Even if the foundation is shaky, the structure it supports can still rise. Think of how fragile human confidence is, how quickly it falters under doubt. In such a world, belief itself is a form of power. To be told you are gifted is to be handed an identity, a lens through which you see yourself. It is both armor and challenge, armor against insecurity, and challenge to prove the story true. The performance that follows is not fake. It is real, built moment by moment, choice by choice, until the potential once imagined becomes actual. The tale is not limited to the gifted. It can be told to anyone. Tell someone they are resilient, and resilience grows. Tell them they are kind, and kindness blossoms. Tell them they are leaders, and leadership awakens. Words carve pathways in the mind, and people walk them without realizing who laid the stones. A life becomes a narrative, and the narrative becomes a life. But this raises a haunting question. If so much of potential is unlocked by belief, how much is lost because it was never spoken? How many children, told they were average, believed it? How many lives shrank because the tale they were given was too small? The tragedy of potential is not just that it can fail, but that it can remain forever unrealized because no one dared to name it. And so, the unlocking potential tale is both gift and warning. It shows us the power we have over each other, the responsibility in every label we give. To call someone gifted is to set them on a path, whether they want it or not. To call them limited is to build walls before they even begin. The words we choose ripple outward, shaping destinies in silence. Perhaps the truth is that giftedness itself is not fixed. It is not a secret quality hidden in the blood. It is a performance born of expectation, nurtured by belief, hardened through repetition. Potential is not unlocked by talent alone. It is unlocked by story. By someone whispering, again and again, that greatness is possible, until the whisper becomes the person's own inner voice. So when you think of the ones around you, your children, your friends, your colleagues, remember the tale. Remember the strange alchemy of words. A story told often enough can change a life. To tell someone they are gifted may be to make it true. To withhold such belief may be to let the seed wither before it ever sprouts. In the end, we are all shaped by tales told about us. Some are prisons. Some are wings. And the difference lies not in whether they are true, but in whether we choose to live them. The unlocking potential tale is not just about seeing talent, it is about creating it. It is about telling a story so persistently that a person performs it into reality, until what was once belief becomes fact, and what was once a mask becomes the face itself. Data myth loop. Imagine a number. At first, it is uncertain, shaky, maybe even wrong. But it is published once, then cited again, then repeated in an article, then echoed in a speech, then baked into a policy. Soon it loses its question marks. It gains weight not from truth, but from repetition. What began as flawed data hardens into fact, shaping decisions, budgets, and beliefs. This is the data myth loop, the cycle in which error, once amplified, becomes the accepted baseline of reality. At the heart of this lies a simple weakness of human perception. Familiarity feels like truth. When we hear something once, we doubt. When we hear it 100 times, we trust. Psychologists call this the illusory truth effect. And in the world of data, where numbers carry an aura of objectivity, the effect multiplies. A flawed figure is repeated until no one remembers its origin. The myth takes on the authority of science, even though it may have begun as a guess, a mistake, or even a lie. History brims with examples. For years, it was accepted wisdom that humans use only 10% of their brains. The number was never grounded in neuroscience, but it was repeated in self-help books, classrooms, and media until it felt unquestionable. Generations of people believed it, built motivational speeches on it, and shaped attitudes toward intelligence around it. The number was false, but the myth endured. Another example: for decades, the number of deaths from certain historical events was inflated or deflated in reports, often for political purposes. Those figures, once entered into textbooks, became the benchmark. Future generations cited them without realizing their origins were shaky at best. Entire narratives of history bent around numbers that were never quite right. The myth loop closed, sealing error into memory. Even modern economics suffers the loop. Early estimates of unemployment, inflation, or GDP can be flawed, rushed out to meet deadlines. But once announced, the numbers drive headlines, move markets, and influence policy. Later revisions rarely carry the same impact. The initial flawed figure imprints itself, steering decisions long after correction. The myth becomes the anchor, and reality adjusts to it. And then there is the world of online misinformation, where data myths accelerate at the speed of a click. A chart out of context, a percentage misquoted, a graph distorted, shared widely, repeated endlessly, until it feels like the baseline truth. By the time fact checks arrive, the loop has already closed. The flawed number has been accepted, built upon, woven into arguments. The correction struggles to keep pace with the myth. Why does this happen? Because numbers feel like stone. Words can be debated, but numbers feel precise. 70%. 9 out of 10. 1 in 5. These phrases carry authority, even when their foundation is sand. Repetition builds trust, and trust cements myth. Once the baseline is set, all future debate uses it as the starting point, locking the error into the frame of reality. The danger is clear. Flawed baselines create flawed futures. If crime statistics are overstated, policies may swing toward harsher laws. If health risks are exaggerated, resources may be misallocated. If economic numbers are skewed, whole societies can drift into poor decisions. The loop does not just mislead, it sculpts outcomes in the real world. And yet, awareness of the data myth loop is power. It reminds us to ask, where did this number come from? Who first recorded it? How has it been repeated, and by whom? To break the loop, one must trace the myth to its source, expose the uncertainty, and refuse to let repetition substitute for truth. Think of it as an echo chamber. A single voice shouts a figure, the chamber repeats it back, and soon the echo feels like a chorus. But if you walk into the chamber with light, you can see the single speaker behind the illusion. Data myths survive in darkness, where no one asks questions. They dissolve when scrutinized. So the next time a number arrives, polished and confident, pause. Remember the data myth loop. Numbers are not immune to error. Repetition does not sanctify truth. And what we accept too quickly may become the foundation for generations of decisions. The loop is subtle, but it is real, and breaking it requires the courage to ask again and again, is this fact, or is it myth? Because once the loop closes, the myth lives on. And in that way, even a flawed number can shape the destiny of nations. Forbidden knowledge lure. There is a peculiar gravity in the things we are told we cannot know. The moment knowledge is labeled forbidden, it begins to glow in the imagination, brighter than any truth freely available. Rumors of hidden texts, sealed archives, suppressed experiments, these whispers do more than stir curiosity. They create motion. People risk exile, prison, even death, chasing after knowledge precisely because it is marked as untouchable. The prohibition itself is the lure, and in chasing the rumor, explorers and rebels give it power, dragging hidden possibilities into the open and sometimes changing history itself. Think of the Garden of Eden. The fruit was not described as beautiful, not described as delicious. Its defining trait was that it was forbidden. That alone made it irresistible. The story reflects something deep in human nature. The moment a line is drawn, minds ache to cross it. A locked door becomes more intriguing than an open gate. A rumor of secret power becomes more believable than plain truth. The forbidden lures us, not despite the warning, but because of it. History repeats this lesson. When books were banned in medieval Europe, underground presses flourished. The forbidden texts traveled further in secrecy than they might have in freedom, because readers believed that what was hidden must hold extraordinary truths. Censorship forged rebellion, and rebellion reshaped nations. When Galileo's works were suppressed for challenging the Church, the act of forbidding them ignited centuries of scientific defiance. The very attempt to bury knowledge made it immortal. The same is true in politics. When governments classify information, conspiracies blossom in the absence of transparency. Rumors spread. What are they hiding? What truth is too dangerous to know? Citizens organize, whistleblowers emerge, entire movements rise, not from proof, but from suspicion. The lure of forbidden knowledge births rebellion, whether the secrets are real or imagined. Even in science, entire fields have been pursued because they were once taboo. Genetics, nuclear energy, artificial intelligence. Once deemed dangerous, once whispered about in shadows, they now shape the very structure of civilization. And yet, the lure is not always noble. Forbidden knowledge has birthed tragedies as well as triumphs. Obsession with secret powers has led seekers down dark paths, alchemy turning to poison, cults twisting rumor into control, societies fracturing under conspiracies mistaken for truth. To chase what is forbidden is to walk a knife's edge. Sometimes the pursuit uncovers wisdom. Other times it unravels sanity. The lure itself does not promise enlightenment, it promises only risk. But perhaps the most haunting part of the cycle is that the knowledge need not even exist to have power. Rumors alone are enough. Tales of hidden chambers beneath cities, suppressed cures for disease, classified evidence of life beyond Earth. Whether true or false, they inspire quests, rebellions, and movements that reshape the real world. Belief in the forbidden can spark revolutions, even if the secret at the center was only smoke. The lure is self-fulfilling. It drives people to create the change the rumor promised, whether or not the knowledge was ever real. So what does this reveal? That knowledge, or the belief in knowledge, is never passive. It is not just information stored on a page or locked in a vault. It is a force, capable of drawing people into danger, into wonder, into rebellion. When it is marked as forbidden, its gravity multiplies, pulling the mind toward it with irresistible strength. And so we live in a paradox. The more tightly secrets are sealed, the more irresistible they become. The more violently truths are suppressed, the more powerful their eventual eruption. Humanity is drawn forward not only by the light of discovery, but by the shadow of prohibition. The forbidden calls us, and we answer. Not always wisely, not always safely, but always compelled. So when you hear a rumor of hidden knowledge, ask yourself, is the secret truly dangerous, or is the danger in the pursuit itself? For the lure of the forbidden is not in what it contains, but in what it awakens: curiosity, defiance, rebellion. And once awakened, those forces cannot be silenced. Time pressure fiction. There is a peculiar force that shapes human behavior, not born from the ticking of clocks, but from the ticking of imagination. It is the pressure of time we invent, the belief that a moment is running out, that a chance will vanish unless we act now. These imagined deadlines, whether real or fabricated, become tyrants in the mind. And under their weight, people rush, stumble, cut corners, and force outcomes that might never have been necessary. This is time pressure fiction, the illusion of urgency that bends reality until it produces real consequences. We see it in everyday life. A student believes they cannot possibly wait until tomorrow to finish a project, so they stay awake all night, pouring out rushed work that could have been better with patience. A company convinces itself that if it doesn't launch a product within a month, the opportunity will vanish, so the release comes broken, full of flaws, damaging the very reputation it was meant to save. The deadline may not have been absolute, but the belief in its absoluteness created a cascade of rushed mistakes. The fiction of time became as powerful as time itself. Psychologists call this the deadline effect. People respond more to the perception of scarcity than to actual scarcity. If a clock is set, even artificially, it ignites urgency. This is why marketing thrives on timers, countdowns, limited time offers. The brain reacts as though opportunity is fleeing, even when it is only imagined. In economics, this effect creates bubbles. Investors, told that a window is closing, rush to buy, inflating value until the collapse becomes real. A story of urgency triggers a frenzy, and the frenzy makes the story true. History is littered with catastrophic examples. During wars, leaders often set arbitrary timetables for offensives, believing that speed meant advantage. Armies were thrown forward before supplies or strategy were ready, leading to devastating losses. In politics, governments promise rapid reform, driven by invented time pressure, only to collapse under the weight of their own haste. Even science is not immune. Research rushed to meet deadlines can be riddled with errors, its conclusions crumbling under scrutiny. Time pressure, when fictionally constructed, can derail progress more effectively than any true obstacle. And yet, the trap is subtle. Because sometimes imagined deadlines do produce results. They jolt people from inertia, push projects to completion, drive individuals to seize opportunities they might have let slip. The trick of time pressure is that it carries both promise and peril. It can sharpen focus, or it can distort judgment. It can motivate action, or it can sabotage it. The boundary is razor-thin, and often invisible until hindsight reveals whether the deadline was useful or destructive. On the deepest level, time pressure fiction reveals how much of human life is governed not by reality, but by perception. The clock on the wall is constant, but the clock in the mind is volatile, and often invented. Nations rush into wars because they fear a last chance for power. Companies rush into markets because they fear missing the critical window. Individuals rush into relationships, careers, or decisions because they imagine a closing door. And so, countless outcomes, wars, failures, triumphs, collapses, unfold not because time demanded them, but because the fear of time demanded them. The irony is that the universe itself feels no such rush. Galaxies drift for billions of years, stars live and die in patient arcs of time. It is humans who carve urgency into the present, who write deadlines into fate, who live as if the clock is always seconds from midnight. And perhaps that is why so much of history feels like a storm of rushed decisions, because when imagination tells us time is short, we cannot resist acting as though it is. So the question becomes, how many of our outcomes were necessary, and how many were forced by clocks that never really ticked? How much of history is written not by time itself, but by time pressure fiction? Stories of urgency that bent behavior, rushed choices, and sculpted futures out of fear of running out of time. We live under these fictions every day. And as long as we believe them, they will continue to shape reality, not because they are true, but because we act as though they are. The deadline becomes real the moment we decide it is. And the outcomes, once set in motion, do not care whether the clock was true or imagined. The fiction of time leaves behind consequences as real as any truth. Cultural script continuity. Every culture tells stories about itself. Stories of character, of identity, of what it means to belong. They begin with words like, "We are a people who," and they end by shaping how people actually live. This is cultural script continuity, the strange loop in which stories about how we are force us to act that way, until myth and behavior merge into one. The process is almost invisible. A child hears that their nation is hardworking, or proud, or peaceful, or fierce. They hear it in classrooms, in songs, in the small comments of family members. Over time, the story becomes an expectation, and the expectation becomes a mold. If you are told long enough that our people are brave, then fear becomes shameful. If you are told that our people never quit, then failure feels like betrayal. The script is not just descriptive, it is prescriptive. It does not simply tell who you are. It tells you how to be. Consider how nations frame themselves. The Japanese cultural script of harmony, the American script of individual freedom, the British script of resilience under pressure. Each begins as a story, but the more it is repeated, the more people bend themselves to fit it. When reality contradicts the story, people often hide their true selves to maintain the illusion. The continuity of the cultural script is not maintained by truth, but by performance. Everyone plays the role, so the story survives. But it goes deeper. Cultural scripts shape not just individuals, but entire institutions. If a society's script says, "We are warriors," then its schools, politics, and rituals will train people to valorize strength, discipline, and sacrifice. If the script says, "We are chosen," then religion and law will mirror that chosen status. If the script says, "We are victims," then even success may be framed as temporary, fragile, or undeserved. The story does not just describe culture, it becomes the engine of culture, self-reinforcing across centuries. History shows how powerful these scripts can be. The Spartan myth of martial superiority drove generations into brutal training, until even their children embodied the story of unbreakable soldiers. The Soviet narrative of collective struggle against adversity made sacrifice an expectation, reshaping everyday life to fit the myth of endurance. The American frontier myth of rugged individualism turned expansion into destiny and reshaped laws, politics, and values for centuries. In each case, people believed the story, lived the story, and passed it forward, whether or not it was ever fully true. Psychology explains why this continuity is so hard to resist. Identity is social, not solitary. We learn who we are by the mirrors around us. When everyone around us insists, "This is what it means to be one of us," we adopt the behaviors required to belong. To resist the script is to risk exclusion, ridicule, or isolation. The pull of conformity makes fiction feel like destiny. And once a generation has lived the story, they pass it to the next, believing it is not a choice but a truth. Yet, the most haunting part is this. Cultural scripts can trap societies in patterns they no longer need. A people told for centuries that they are warriors may keep fighting even when peace would serve them better. A culture told it is stoic may hide suffering until it breaks in silence. A nation told it is destined for greatness may overreach until collapse. Stories written in the past can dictate the future, long after the original context is gone. Continuity becomes a cage, where myths control lives more powerfully than facts. And yet, within that same loop lies resilience. Scripts can preserve traditions, protect identities, and give strength through hardship. A cultural story of perseverance may carry a people through famine. A story of creativity may inspire generations of artists. A story of unity may protect a nation against fracture. Continuity is not always illusion. It can be the glue that holds people together. The question is not whether the script exists. The question is whether it serves. So what, then, is the lesson of cultural script continuity? It is to recognize the power of stories to create reality. To understand that when we say, "This is who we are not simply describing the past, we are commanding the future." Every cultural narrative is both a memory and a prophecy. It is a mirror we hold up to ourselves, and a mask we are asked to wear. Sometimes the mask strengthens us. Sometimes it suffocates us. Perhaps wisdom lies in learning when to let a script guide us, and when to set it down. To ask whether the story we repeat is still alive, or whether we are only acting a role inherited from ghosts. To know that culture is not fate, but a script that can be revised, rewritten, reshaped. Because in the end, cultural script continuity is both a blessing and a warning. It is the reminder that humans do not just live stories, we live through them. And the story we tell of who we are is never neutral. It is a force, a command, and a prophecy, binding us until we dare to write a new one. Whispered truth effect. Truth does not always roar. Sometimes it creeps, quiet as breath, carried in hushed tones from one ear to the next. A rumor whispered cautiously gathers a strange kind of power. The whispered truth effect, where words gain weight not by volume, but by secrecy, by the fragile intimacy of being passed like contraband knowledge. When something is spoken softly, it feels dangerous. When it is shared in whispers, it feels real. Think of how the mind responds to silence. A shouted claim can be dismissed, debated, laughed away. But a secret passed in lowered tones lingers. If someone leans close, looks around, and says, "Don't tell anyone," but your brain listens differently. The information is no longer just a statement. It is a possession, a gift of hidden truth. You carry it with care because it feels precious, forbidden, more authentic than what is broadcast aloud. Whispering transforms rumor into reality. This is why conspiracy theories often thrive in secretive communities. The more something is shared with caution, the more credible it feels. If it were false, why would it need to be whispered? The act of secrecy becomes evidence itself. And as each person repeats the rumor, their hesitation reinforces its weight. A rumor that might collapse under scrutiny instead grows stronger in the shadows. Psychologists know this as the power of exclusivity. Humans crave being part of the inner circle, the ones who know what others do not. When a piece of information is framed as secret, its emotional value multiplies. We protect it, defend it, spread it carefully, not recklessly, because to do so is to preserve our own sense of importance. Whispered truth is not just about the rumor, it is about belonging, about being trusted with hidden knowledge. The irony is that secrecy, which should make us doubt, does the opposite. Instead of asking, "Why is this hidden?" we ask, "What makes it so true it cannot be spoken aloud?" The very act of lowering the voice transforms words into prophecy. Caution becomes proof. And repetition spreads the contagion until the whisper is heard everywhere, no longer secret but still carrying the residue of secrecy. By then, it has already hardened into belief. History is filled with whispered truths that became reality, not because they were factual, but because they were spoken quietly enough to sound undeniable. In medieval courts, rumors of treachery spread in corridors, whispered between servants and nobles, until suspicion became execution. In modern times, rumors of corruption or scandal travel faster in quiet tones than they ever do in newspapers. A whisper feels like revelation, while a headline feels like noise. The medium of delivery changes the weight of the message. Even in personal lives, the effect is haunting. A quiet comment, "I don't trust him, she's not what she seems," passed in secrecy can alter how someone is seen forever. The victim of the whisper rarely has the chance to defend themselves, because the rumor never shouts, never declares itself openly. It hides, it seeps, it shapes perception invisibly. Reputations collapse not under accusation, but under whispers too quiet to fight. And yet, not all whispered truths are false. Some are warnings too dangerous to speak aloud. In regimes of fear, in families of silence, in institutions where power punishes dissent, truth can only survive as a whisper. In those cases, secrecy is not proof of deceit, but proof of oppression. The whisper is the only form truth can take. It survives by hiding in breath, waiting for a safer time to be spoken aloud. The duality is what makes the effect so unsettling. A whispered rumor can be poison or salvation. It can be the spark of paranoia, or the fragile preservation of reality under tyranny. The whisper always carries more weight than the shout, but whether that weight is healing or destructive depends on the heart of what is carried. So why do whispered truths hold such sway over us? Perhaps because they bypass logic and tap directly into instinct. A whisper signals intimacy, danger, and exclusivity all at once. It bypasses debate and becomes personal. To be trusted with a whisper is to be implicated in it, woven into its story. Once you carry it, you are no longer a neutral witness, you are part of its survival. And so you pass it on, cautiously, carefully, reinforcing its aura with every breath. The whispered truth effect is not about accuracy. It is about psychology. It is about how humans treat the secret as sacred, the hidden as authentic, the quiet as undeniable. A rumor shouted may be forgotten. A rumor whispered may last for generations. So when you hear something spoken in lowered tones, pause. Ask not only if it is true, but why it is whispered. Is it hidden because it is dangerous truth, or because it is fragile falsehood made stronger by secrecy? The whisper will not answer. It only travels, quiet and insistent, shaping minds in silence. Found document myth. Imagine the thrill of discovery. Dusty shelves in a forgotten archive, a crumbling scroll unearthed from the earth, a manuscript said to be centuries old, written by hands long vanished. The allure of such documents is irresistible. Ancient wisdom, hidden prophecy, secret knowledge guiding us from the past. But not every ancient text is what it claims to be. Some are planted, crafted in modern times, disguised in old ink and weathered paper, seeded with intent. And once discovered, they can ignite movements, reshape ideologies, even bend the course of nations. This is the found document myth. False relics treated as truth, shaping reality through belief. The power of these documents lies not in their authenticity, but in the belief they inspire. When people read words they think are ancient, they grant them authority. A prophecy from centuries past feels weightier than a speech given yesterday. A manuscript thought to be sacred is harder to doubt than a pamphlet written by a contemporary rival. And so, forged documents can pierce deeper into the human psyche than open persuasion ever could. History provides chilling examples. In the early 20th century, a text called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion appeared, claiming to be the minutes of a secret meeting of a global conspiracy. It was, in fact, a forgery, assembled from older political satire, twisted into a fraudulent manifesto. Yet it spread like wildfire. Entire political movements treated it as authentic. Policies, propaganda, and persecution followed. Millions suffered not because the document was real, but because it was believed to be real. The myth became truth through its impact. Go further back, and you find other forgeries that shaped power. The Donation of Constantine was a medieval document claiming that the Roman Emperor Constantine had granted authority over Western lands to the Pope. It was a fabrication. Yet for centuries it justified papal power in Europe, altering the balance of politics and religion. It took nearly 700 years before it was conclusively exposed as false. By then, its influence had already carved history. Even myths of hidden prophecy have swayed entire populations. The discovery or invention of lost gospels or ancient prophecies has fueled sects and cults. Movements often rise from the conviction that they alone have access to forgotten truth. Whether those texts are genuine or forged becomes almost irrelevant once belief hardens. The found document myth thrives on the psychology of secret knowledge, the sense of privilege, of being chosen, of touching truth hidden from the masses. The cycle is always the same. A planted document appears. Its style mimics antiquity, archaic language, faded ink, claims of lost lineage. Believers rally to it, citing it as unshakable evidence. Leaders seize upon it, using it as a banner. And soon, decisions are made, lives are shaped, sometimes destroyed, all because of words written not in the distant past, but in deliberate deception. The power of the found document myth is not in what it says about history, but in how it scripts the present. Modern technology has not ended this cycle, it has amplified it. Online, digital discoveries circulate in the same way forged manuscripts once did. Documents appear claiming to reveal hidden government conspiracies, suppressed scientific truths, or ancient alien records. Many are fabricated, some intentionally, others born from misinterpretation. Yet they spread, fueling communities, movements, and even real-world actions. The myth, once planted, grows roots in digital soil just as it once did in parchment. What makes this myth so enduring is the human hunger for origin stories. We crave foundations, sacred texts, anchors that root us in something larger than ourselves. A found document feels like destiny in physical form, proof that our path was written long before us. That longing makes us vulnerable to manipulation. To believe that your struggle is foretold, your cause blessed by ancient authority, is to feel invincible. And so the myth does not simply deceive, it empowers. It can ignite passion, unify masses, and justify extremes. But there is a cost. When false documents are exposed, trust shatters. Entire movements collapse, or double down in denial. History bears scars from these deceptions, wars fought, persecutions justified, freedoms stripped away, all in the name of forged words. The found document myth reminds us that belief itself can be more dangerous than truth. For once enough people act as though a fiction is real, the fiction becomes real in its consequences. So when we encounter texts said to be ancient, sacred, or secret, we must ask, who benefits from this discovery? Who gains power from its words? Is the document truly a window into the past, or is it a mirror reflecting the ambitions of its author? The found document myth thrives on our reluctance to question, on our awe of old parchment and faded ink. But history whispers, beware the words too perfectly aligned with present power. Because once a forged scroll is unrolled, once a false prophecy is proclaimed, its ripples spread far beyond its paper. The ink may be false, but the choices it inspires are real. And those choices shape the future, long after the deception itself has been forgotten. Reflection warping. Imagine a mirror that doesn't reflect you as you are, but as someone else has imagined you to be. At first you might laugh, dismiss it, deny it. But if the mirror is everywhere, in films, in books, in news, in art, slowly, the reflection seeps in. People begin to adjust their clothes, their voices, their very identities to match what they see. Fictional portrayals stop being entertainment and start being blueprints. This is reflection warping, when stories told about a group reshape how that group sees itself, until imagination rewrites reality. Think of stereotypes on screen. For decades, certain communities were cast in narrow roles: the villain, the servant, the comic relief. Generations grew up seeing themselves reflected in those distorted ways. At first, those images may have felt false, even insulting. But the repetition carved grooves in expectation. Some began to internalize the reflection, adjusting behavior to match the script society had already assigned them. Others fought it, but even resistance was framed against the warped image. The mirror was inescapable, bending both perception and self-perception. This is not abstract theory. It is history. In the early 20th century, Hollywood's portrayals of certain ethnicities hardened into stereotypes so powerful that real individuals were judged, hired, or excluded according to fictional archetypes. Young people, watching these portrayals, sometimes leaned into the roles because they were the only available scripts for belonging. Art created identity, not by reflecting truth, but by repeating distortion until it felt familiar. It happens with gender as well. Fiction floods culture with images of what a real man, or proper woman, should be. Those portrayals warp reflection, shaping how entire generations think of themselves and how they must act to be accepted. The result is not just individual confusion but collective identity sculpted by stories that were never neutral. Culture becomes a hall of mirrors where fiction dictates what it means to live in the world. Even groups that hold power are not immune. Soldiers see themselves in war films and sometimes begin to model their behavior on the cinematic version of war rather than its lived reality. Criminal organizations mythologize themselves through the lens of novels and movies, adopting rituals and codes first invented by authors. Subcultures build identities out of fictional portrayals, until the line between representation and reality dissolves completely. Fiction becomes prophecy, and prophecy becomes self-image. The mechanism is subtle but relentless. The more a group is portrayed a certain way, the more the outside world expects it of them. Opportunities, relationships, and judgments are filtered through that lens. And under the weight of expectation, people bend, conform, or rebel. But even rebellion is trapped within the frame. It still defines itself in opposition to the distorted reflection. The mirror warps, and the warping shapes the self. This is why battles over representation matter so deeply. They are not mere cultural debates about casting choices or storylines. They are struggles over self-perception, over how entire communities will imagine themselves. For to change the stories is to change the mirrors, and to change the mirrors is to change the identities reflected within them. But here lies the haunting paradox. While reflection warping can imprison groups in false identities, it can also free them. New stories can shatter old mirrors, replacing distortion with dignity, caricature with complexity. Fiction has the same power to liberate as it does to confine. What once warped the self-image of generations can be rewritten, reimagined, and used as a tool of transformation. So when you watch a film, read a book, or scroll through stories online, remember, these are not just reflections of reality, they are engines of reality. They do not only show who groups are, they tell them who to be. And over time, those portrayals become lived truth. Fiction bends perception, perception bends identity, and identity bends the future. Reflection warping is not a trick of art. It is a force shaping lives, sculpting communities, and directing history. The mirror is never neutral. It always bends, always distorts, always creates. The question is, who holds the mirror, and what shape will it force us to become? Expert projection. There is a peculiar power that comes when an authority figure speaks about the future. A scientist, an economist, a politician, a prophet, it does not matter the field. When their words carry weight, their projection of tomorrow can ripple outward into action today. People listen, they adjust, they behave differently. And slowly, almost invisibly, their collective response begins to sculpt the very reality that was once only spoken. This is the phenomenon of expert projection, the authority of a forecast bending the present until the future aligns with it. In the modern world, you can see this most clearly in financial markets. When a central bank announces that inflation will rise, businesses raise prices in anticipation, workers demand higher wages, investors shift their strategies. The prediction becomes the cause. Inflation accelerates, not because it was written into the stars, but because the belief in its inevitability made people act in ways that ensured it. The projection reshaped reality. Or consider politics. When polls declare that a candidate is unelectable, supporters vanish, donations dry up, volunteers stay home. Conversely, when polls say someone is destined to win, undecided voters lean toward them, wanting to side with the perceived victor. The projection guides choice, and choice makes the projection true. Elections are not decided only in the voting booth, but in the psychological shadows cast by expert forecasts. Education and psychology reveal the same trap. In the 1960s, researchers discovered the Pygmalion effect. When teachers were told certain children were gifted, those children performed better, not because they were inherently more capable, but because the teacher's expectations shaped their interactions, their encouragement, their patience. The label became prophecy. The authority of expertise created a reality where none existed before. Even in warfare, the projection of experts has rewritten history. Military leaders, warned by advisors that an enemy is about to strike, may launch preemptive actions. Those actions provoke retaliation, creating the very conflict that the predictions sought to prevent. A projection of war becomes the trigger for war. In this way, entire nations can spiral into battles born from forecasts rather than facts. The reason expert projection is so powerful lies deep in human psychology. People seek certainty. In a world that feels unpredictable, forecasts and predictions act like maps. And when the map is drawn by an authority, people trust it, even when the terrain does not yet exist. They follow the map so faithfully that the landscape shifts beneath their feet, molded into the very shape the projection outlined. What was once a forecast becomes a blueprint. But this power is double-edged. A hopeful projection can inspire progress. When medical authorities predict that a cure is within reach, funding flows, researchers commit themselves, and the cure may indeed appear. When visionaries predict space travel or renewable energy revolutions, engineers rally to make them real. The projection acts as a spark, igniting belief and action until the impossible is achieved. At the same time, destructive projections can imprison societies. When experts predict economic collapse, people may retreat into fear, tightening spending, halting growth, ensuring the collapse they dreaded. When authorities warn that peace cannot last, nations prepare for inevitable conflict, guaranteeing the tension that will make war certain. False prophecies, once trusted, carry consequences as real as any truth. The unsettling truth is this: much of what we call the future is not discovered but constructed. It is built, often unconsciously, from the expectations seeded by those we trust. Their words ripple through the present, turning into behavior, policy, and belief. And once enough people live as if the projection is true, it becomes true. The authority of the expert is not only in their knowledge of what will happen, it is in their power to make it happen. So the question becomes, whose projections are shaping us now? Which futures are we building not because they are inevitable, but because we have been told they are? Are we accelerating crises simply because we believe they cannot be stopped? Are we achieving breakthroughs only because someone had the audacity to declare them within reach? The trap and the miracle are the same. Expert projections do not simply forecast reality, they write it. And in the end, perhaps the most haunting thought is this: the future does not arrive fully formed. It is whispered into existence, declared into motion, projected into shape by the voices we trust. We are not just passengers on time's river. We are builders, compelled by words of authority, sculpting reality to match predictions that may have been nothing more than echoes of belief. Sudden trends spark. Some fires begin with sparks, not with fuel. A rumor, a meme, a joke, something invented without weight, without substance. But once released, it spreads. People share it, laugh at it, imitate it. And what began as fiction becomes real. This is the sudden trend spark, a made-up idea that goes viral until people enact it, proving itself true through imitation. The mechanism is simple but powerful. A story is told, a new dance, a hidden challenge, a bizarre lifestyle hack. At first, no one has done it. But the claim itself creates a script. Everyone is trying this. This is the new craze. People see the claim and feel a pull. To dismiss it is safe, but to join it feels exciting, like tapping into an invisible crowd. And soon, the fiction is no longer fiction. People act it out, and in their actions, the story comes alive. We've seen it again and again in the age of the internet. A challenge begins as a joke, but quickly leaps into reality. The ice bucket challenge spread not because it was necessary, but because it became a signal of belonging. The Tide Pod panic, originally a warning against a non-existent trend, ended up drawing curious individuals to test the very danger it tried to prevent. Conspiracy theories, urban legends, viral pranks, they all rely on the same spark. The claim that this is happening is enough to make it happen. Psychology explains why. Humans are social mirrors. We watch others to know how to behave. When we believe a crowd exists, we lean toward joining it. The sudden trend spark exploits this instinct. Even if no crowd existed at the start, the belief in a crowd is enough to generate one. Every new participant validates the story, drawing in more, until the fiction spirals into fact. And it is not just internet culture. History is littered with sudden sparks. During medieval Europe, waves of dancing mania swept across towns, people collapsing in the streets, overcome by convulsions and motion. Some historians suggest these were sparked not by plague or madness, but by rumor. One person danced, another joined, and soon hundreds were moving as if possessed. The story of contagion became contagious. Similarly, in schools and factories, cases of mass psychogenic illness have erupted, where a single fainting episode spreads until dozens fall ill, all because the belief in sickness became stronger than reality itself. The sudden trend spark reveals a deeper truth. Behavior is not always rooted in fact, but in narrative. If enough people are convinced that something is spreading, the spread becomes inevitable. Culture does not need substance to move, it needs story. And in the digital world, where stories travel faster than thought, the sparks are endless. But there is danger in this fire. Some sparks are harmless, memes, jokes, dances. Others become destructive. A panic about food contamination can collapse sales overnight. A false story of violence can spark riots before it is disproven. A rumor of revolution can draw crowds into the streets, until revolution itself erupts. Leaders know this, corporations know this, and propagandists know this. By planting the illusion of a trend, they can manufacture behavior. They do not need control of truth, only control of belief. And yet, within the sudden trend spark lies fascination. It is proof of how malleable we are, how tightly bound to one another's perception. It shows the fragility of reality itself, how quickly the line between imagination and action can dissolve. A spark born from nothing can redirect entire cultures. A whisper in one place can echo as thunder in another. So what does this mean for us? It means that we live in a world where fiction can become fact by collective choice. Where everyone is doing it is not just description, but prophecy. Where participation is driven less by desire than by fear of exclusion, by curiosity, by the lure of belonging. To resist the spark requires awareness, to pause, to ask, do I want this, or am I only joining because I was told it already exists? The sudden trend spark is not just about viral culture. It is about the way human beings shape their own reality through repetition. What we echo becomes real. What we enact becomes true. The story does not follow behavior. Behavior follows the story. Look around, and you will see sparks everywhere. Tiny rumors, playful memes, anxious warnings. Some will vanish in the noise. But some will catch, burn, and spread until they reshape how people act, what they buy, what they believe, even what they fear. In the end, the difference between a joke and a movement may be nothing more than how many people decided to join. That is the sudden trend spark. A story that begins as fiction, grows as imitation, and ends as truth. A reminder that reality is not only what is, but what we collectively decide to perform. Journey Myth Map. For as long as we have drawn maps, we have filled their edges with stories. Unknown seas marked by sea serpents. Blank continents labeled with golden cities. Empty mountains painted with kingdoms of gods. Fiction was not decoration, it was direction. A whispered legend could send fleets across oceans, armies into jungles, wanderers into deserts. This is the Journey Myth Map, where tales imagined on parchment become compasses for real footsteps, where fictions carve roads into reality. Think of El Dorado, the golden city said to gleam in the jungles of South America. No explorer ever found it. Yet thousands tried. Men sailed from Europe, crossed rivers, climbed mountains, all chasing the shimmer of a place that never existed. Villages were built, lives were lost, continents reshaped, not by gold itself, but by the story of gold. The myth became more powerful than the material. It was not the treasure that mattered, but the belief that it waited. The same is true of the Fountain of Youth, the river Styx, the lost city of Atlantis, the paradise of Shambhala. Each was born in imagination, whispered in myth, painted in texts or tales. But people set out to find them as if they were coordinates rather than allegories. Maps marked with dragons and castles were not treated as art. They were treated as guides. Sailors trusted them. Kings funded them. Generations bled for them. Why? Because humans are not navigated by truth alone. We are navigated by meaning. A place imagined with enough conviction becomes a destination. The unknown terrifies us, but the unknown framed by a story tempts us. The blank horizon becomes less terrifying when it is filled with the promise of kingdoms, treasures, or sacred realms. Myth does not paralyze, it motivates. And in the end, it matters less whether the place is real than whether the journey begins. Psychologists call this the power of expectation shaping behavior. Once you believe a goal exists, you act as though it does. The body commits, the mind justifies, the will endures. Expeditions fueled by myth often stumbled upon truths far different than what they sought. Columbus never reached Asia, but his journey, inspired by mythical geography, altered history forever. Legends misled him, but they also moved him. The map of imagination is what brought him to land that no chart had yet revealed. In this way, myths are not false. They are catalysts. The story of El Dorado may have been fiction, but the expeditions it inspired were real. The Fountain of Youth may have been fantasy, but it carried explorers into lands they would never otherwise have entered. The lost city of Atlantis may have been a parable, but its pull has led divers, archaeologists, and dreamers into every ocean, uncovering countless other truths along the way. Fiction creates reality by shaping where we choose to look. But there is a darker side. The Journey Myth Map can also destroy. The promise of golden cities led to conquests, enslavement, devastation of entire civilizations. Myths turned into excuses for violence, justifying atrocities in the name of chasing illusions. A dream painted on parchment can become a nightmare written in blood. The map can mislead not only explorers, but empires. And yet, even with its dangers, the pull is irresistible. We still chase mythical maps today. Stories of alien worlds inspire space missions. Tales of multiverses inspire scientific theories. The modern myths are not of golden cities, but of exoplanets, wormholes, hidden civilizations beneath ice or oceans. We do not yet know if they exist, but we sail toward them anyway, because the possibility is enough. Our technology may be sharper, our skepticism deeper, but the impulse remains the same. Stories steer us. The Journey Myth Map reveals a truth about the human condition. We move not toward certainty, but toward possibility. The imagined place is often more powerful than the proven one. A desert with no story is empty, but a desert rumored to hold a hidden kingdom is irresistible. Fiction marks the spot, and reality answers with footsteps. So when you look at old maps filled with monsters and legends, remember, they are not mistakes. They are engines. They tell us less about geography than about desire. They show us how humans transform the unknown into adventure, how imagination itself becomes direction. The place may never exist, but the journey will. And perhaps that is the secret. The myth was never meant to be found. It was meant to be followed. El Dorado is not a city. The fountain of youth is not a spring. Atlantis is not an island. They are lures, drawing us forward, ensuring that the map of imagination becomes the map of reality. We arrive somewhere different than where the story promised, but we arrive nonetheless. In the end, the Journey Myth Map is not about fiction or fact. It is about the mysterious power of belief to bend the path of history. It is about stories that summon ships, legends that command armies, and whispers that build roads. To chase a myth is to admit that we are guided not only by what is, but by what might be. And in that pursuit, fiction becomes real, not in the destination, but in the journey itself. Consumer fantasy loop. Imagine a glowing screen. On it, a car glides down an empty highway, the sunset melting across the horizon. The ad never speaks of horsepower or torque, it whispers of freedom, adventure, self-worth. Or a perfume commercial, a bottle held like a relic, a model walking through a dreamscape of marble halls, the scent never described, only suggested as seduction, power, transcendence. In these moments, you are not being sold a product, you are being sold a story. And once that story lodges in the imagination, it begins to shape behavior. This is the consumer fantasy loop, advertising fantasies so vivid they bend desire, leading people to buy not objects, but the myths attached to them. The loop begins with imagination. A product is linked not to its function, but to a vision of a better self. The car becomes freedom. The shoes become confidence. The phone becomes identity, status, belonging. The advertisement plants the fantasy, painting it in symbols more powerful than specifications. Then the consumer acts. They buy not because they need the thing, but because they want to live inside the dream. And after buying, they carry the object as a piece of that imagined self, reinforcing the fantasy in daily life. Consider the diamond engagement ring. For most of history, it was not a tradition. It was an invention of a marketing campaign in the 20th century. Advertisers linked the diamond to eternal love, to status, to devotion. The fantasy caught. Generations now feel that a proposal without a diamond is incomplete. The loop closed. The fantasy created the habit reinforced the fantasy, and the market grew into billions. Or think of soda. Sugar water alone holds no mythology. But tie it to images of youth, rebellion, friendship, summer freedom, and suddenly the drink becomes an experience, not a beverage. Consumers reach for the bottle not for thirst alone, but for the dream it represents. Every purchase reinforces the story, keeping the loop alive. The mechanism works because humans are creatures of narrative. We rarely buy for logic alone. We buy because stories make objects meaningful. The sneaker is not rubber and fabric, it is athleticism, coolness, belonging to a tribe. The lipstick is not wax and pigment, it is power, attraction, the fantasy of transformation. Advertising knows this, and so it saturates us with symbols, until products become icons of identity. But the consumer fantasy loop is not only external, it is internal. Once we buy, we seek to justify. We wear the watch and imagine ourselves successful. We drive the car and feel freer. Even if the object does not truly transform us, our perception shifts. We begin to live as though the fantasy were real. Belief shapes experience, and experience confirms belief. The loop becomes self-sustaining. And yet, there is danger here. The loop can spiral endlessly, chasing fulfillment through consumption that never fully satisfies. The fantasy is always just ahead, shimmering, promising that one more purchase will complete the picture. But objects age, dreams fade, and new fantasies rise. The cycle continues, keeping consumers chasing an identity that cannot be bought, only imagined. Still, the loop is not wholly sinister. It can inspire creativity, aspiration, even joy. A guitar ad might sell not just wood and strings, but the dream of music, and in buying, someone might actually become a musician. A camera ad might sell the fantasy of adventure, and in chasing it, someone might live more boldly. The fantasy is not always empty. Sometimes it pulls people into lives they might never have dared to try. What matters is awareness. To see the loop is to gain choice. Do you buy the product, or the story around it? Do you step into the fantasy knowingly, or do you let it sweep you along unnoticed? Because advertising does not only sell, it scripts, and those scripts guide the rituals of entire societies. The consumer fantasy loop is the mirror of modern life. We are surrounded by objects, but we live inside the dreams attached to them. Our shelves hold goods, but our minds hold myths. To navigate it is to recognize that every purchase is also a story, and every story has a cost. So the next time an image tempts you, ask, is this hunger mine, or is it a dream planted for me? Because the loop is silent, but it is everywhere, spinning fantasies into desire, desire into action, action into habits that shape the world. Hero narrative pressure. Imagine hearing a story so often, so powerfully, that it begins to whisper into your bones. This is who you must be. The hero's tale, told in songs, in books, in films, in news headlines, seeps into us like a script waiting to be performed. It glorifies courage, sacrifice, triumph over impossible odds. And slowly, some begin to feel the weight of its demand, that they must live up to it, that their worth depends on stepping into danger and embodying the legend. This is the pressure of the hero narrative, when admiration for a story compels real people to risk their lives, not always because they must, but because the script insists they should. History is littered with its traces. Young men and women volunteering for wars, not out of strategy or necessity, but because the story of the brave soldier called to them louder than reason. They marched into battles that consumed them, believing their death might echo in glory, their names carried in honor. The tale of heroism pushed them forward even when survival whispered retreat. The narrative was more powerful than instinct. It happens in revolutions. Protesters standing against armies, outnumbered and outgunned, yet unwilling to step back. Some are driven by justice, yes, but many also by the pull of story. To be remembered as the one who stood tall, to match the admired figure carved in myth. That pressure makes people stand when logic tells them to run. They feel history watching, demanding that they fill the role of hero even at unbearable cost. Even in modern culture, the pressure persists. Firefighters rushing into burning buildings, journalists entering war zones, activists placing themselves in the path of violence. Their choices are undeniably brave, but beneath them often lies the gravitational pull of narrative. They have seen the stories of others who dared, who sacrificed, who became legends. And some part of them cannot bear to fall short of that reflection. To act otherwise would feel like betrayal, not only to others, but to the story they've grown up admiring. But the hero narrative is not always a gift. It can be a trap. It demands sacrifice, even when sacrifice is unnecessary. It glamorizes martyrdom, sometimes pushing people to throw themselves into danger recklessly, chasing honor rather than survival. The pressure to be heroic has broken lives, left families without loved ones, and driven people to step into battles that were never theirs to fight. Fiction tells us that the hero's path is noble, but reality reveals its weight in grief and loss. And yet, we cannot deny its power. Stories of heroes echo because they awaken something universal: the desire to matter, to be remembered, to stand for something larger than ourselves. They bind cultures together, inspire generations, and give individuals the strength to act when fear might otherwise paralyze. The hero narrative is both poison and medicine, dangerous when followed blindly, yet transformative when it calls people to rise beyond apathy. Think of the firefighter who charges into flames, not only to save lives but also to live up to the story of what it means to be a firefighter. Think of the soldier who holds the line, because to break it would betray the countless tales of warriors before him. Think of the ordinary person who leaps into danger to rescue a stranger, driven by an unconscious script that insists, "This is what heroes do." The paradox is haunting. We admire these figures because they seem larger than life, yet they become so because life itself pressures them into the mold of admiration. They are reflections sculpted by stories, then reabsorbed into those stories as proof they were always true. The cycle continues: stories create heroes, and heroes create stories. So the next time you hear of someone stepping into danger, ask yourself, was it necessity, or was it narrative? Did they act because the moment demanded it, or because they could not bear to live a life smaller than the legend they admired? For in the end, the hero narrative is not just about courage. It is about pressure, about the invisible demand that stories place upon real bodies, real choices, real lives. And once that pressure takes hold, many find themselves walking willingly into fire, determined to become the echo of a tale that was waiting for them all along. False consensus building. There is a strange illusion that shapes the way societies think, an illusion born not from truth but from repetition. When someone claims that everyone believes something, when leaders, media, or institutions insist that a certain idea is the majority view, many begin to conform, not because they truly agreed at first, but because they assume they must be the outlier. This is false consensus building, the manufacturing of majority belief through assertion, until people adopt it, and the illusion hardens into reality. Psychologists have long studied this phenomenon. In the 1970s, researchers found that people consistently overestimate how many others share their opinions, behaviors, and choices. A person who smokes assumes most people smoke. Someone who votes for a certain candidate assumes their neighbors do too. We project our own views outward, seeing consensus where none exists. But when this effect is deliberately manipulated, when voices of authority claim the majority agrees, the illusion becomes a powerful tool of control. People accept the narrative of consensus, and in adjusting their own behavior, they slowly transform the illusion into fact. Consider propaganda campaigns throughout history. Totalitarian regimes thrived on declaring that the people were unified, that dissent was a fringe minority. Even those who doubted stayed silent, fearing they were alone. Silence, in turn, made the illusion of consensus seem even stronger. Eventually, individuals surrendered their private doubts and adopted the majority view, not because it convinced them, but because they feared isolation. The false consensus became a real one, built on conformity and fear. This is the power of social proof. Humans are wired to follow the herd. Survival once depended on belonging to the group. When we hear that most people believe something, we instinctively lean toward it, often without questioning the source. This is why marketers plaster phrases like best-selling, most trusted, or number one choice across products. The claim itself nudges people to act as though it is true. Each new buyer reinforces the illusion, and in time, it actually becomes true. Not because the product was inherently superior, but because the story of consensus pulled people into alignment. False consensus also thrives in politics. A poll announced with selective wording, a headline claiming, "The people have spoken," or a leader declaring overwhelming support can sway undecided citizens. Many will conform simply because they do not want to stand outside the majority. Over time, this conformity snowballs, and the false majority morphs into a real one. Elections, policies, even wars have been fueled by nothing more than the illusion that most people already agreed. The trap lies in how invisible this process is. Once the illusion takes hold, it becomes self-reinforcing. Dissenters doubt themselves. Fence-sitters join in. The supposed majority becomes harder to challenge, because no one wants to risk being the only one who disagrees. And soon, the claim "everyone believes this" is no longer false, it has summoned a reality into being. Consensus has been built, but on a foundation of illusion. This reveals something unsettling about truth in human society. It does not always triumph through evidence or reason. Often, it triumphs through numbers, through the perception of numbers, through the illusion that belief is already widespread. What people believe to be popular becomes popular. What they believe to be rare becomes rare. Reality bends not to fact, but to perception. And yet, false consensus is not only dangerous, it can be used to inspire. When civil rights leaders declared that freedom was the will of the people, even when majorities resisted, they planted the illusion of consensus. That illusion emboldened supporters, drew fence-sitters, and eventually helped turn minority ideals into mainstream truths. The same mechanism that traps societies in false beliefs can liberate them, depending on who wields it and why. Still, the danger remains. A society convinced by manufactured consensus can be led anywhere, into fear, into obedience, into violence. When the story of the majority is louder than the actual voices of the people, truth itself becomes irrelevant. Consensus is no longer discovered, it is built, and often built on lies. So the question lingers: how many of our beliefs, our norms, our so-called common sense are not truly ours at all, but the residue of a story told so often it became reality? How much of what we call public opinion is simply a mirror, reflecting the illusion back until we mistake it for truth? The trap of false consensus is not that people are forced to believe, it is that they quietly choose to, thinking they are joining the many. And in doing so, the many are created. Consensus, whether false or true, is always fragile, always constructed. And sometimes, the most powerful majority begins as nothing more than a whispered claim that it already exists. Internalized fiction filter. Each of us carries a lens through which we see the world. It is not neutral, not clear, not objective. It is colored by belief, bent by memory, warped by story. What we see is not simply what is, but what we expect to be. This is the internalized fiction filter, a personal belief system so deeply woven into the mind that it edits reality itself, bending perception until the story we carry feels more true than the world outside. At its core, this filter works like a quiet editor. Imagine reading a manuscript while someone else erases lines and rewrites sentences without your awareness. The story you receive feels seamless, but it has already been altered. Beliefs function in the same way. They cut out contradictions, highlight agreements, distort neutral facts into supporting evidence. We think we are perceiving reality, when in truth, we are perceiving reality through the script we have internalized. Psychology has long studied this. Confirmation bias ensures we notice information that supports our story and dismiss what does not. Cognitive dissonance forces us to resolve conflict by rewriting facts to fit our worldview. Memory itself is selective, more reconstruction than recording. When we believe the world is hostile, we notice threats. When we believe it is kind, we notice compassion. In both cases, the same world exists, but the filter ensures we only see the version consistent with our narrative. Consider two people walking down the same street. One believes the city is dangerous. They see shadows as threats, strangers as predators, silence as menace. The other believes the city is vibrant. They see opportunity, diversity, possibility. The street has not changed. The only difference is the filter. Each internalized fiction produces its own reality, and each person lives inside the truth their mind has built. On larger scales, these filters become identities. A person raised to believe they are cursed may interpret every failure as proof. A person raised to believe they are destined for greatness may interpret every setback as temporary. Nations, too, carry filters, stories of victimhood, of chosen glory, of inevitable struggle. These fictions become so internalized that entire populations live inside them, shaping history as if the story were law. The most haunting part is how resilient the filter is. When faced with evidence that contradicts belief, the mind often doubles down. Facts are dismissed as lies, truth is reframed as illusion. The filter bends the world so that belief survives. In this way, fiction proves stronger than fact. To argue against someone's filter is to argue against the structure of their reality. It is not simply a matter of debate, it is a matter of identity. Yet, this filter is not always harmful. Sometimes, it gives strength. A belief in one's resilience can carry someone through pain. A faith in justice can inspire movements, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The internalized fiction filter can blind, but it can also empower. It can distort, but it can also create meaning. We are not built to see a neutral world, we are built to see a world that sustains our will to live within it. Still, awareness matters. When we recognize the filter, we loosen its grip. We realize that what feels like certainty may only be a story, that what feels like truth may only be interpretation. To step outside the filter is difficult, like trying to see the air we breathe, but it is possible. Philosophy, science, reflection, even art, they are all tools for reminding us that perception is not reality, but a map drawn by belief. The danger is forgetting this. When people insist their filter is the only truth, conflict follows. Two realities collide, each convinced of its certainty. Arguments, wars, divisions, all fueled by filters mistaken for facts. The tragedies of history are not only written in blood, but in stories people refuse to question. So perhaps the lesson of the internalized fiction filter is humility. To know that we see through lenses, not through glass. To question whether our certainty is built on fact or on story. To accept that every belief edits the world, and that we, too, live inside a fiction of our own making. And maybe that is not defeat, but freedom. For if we know our filter exists, we can choose how to shape it. We can adopt stories that empower rather than destroy, that connect rather than divide, that open rather than close. The fiction filter will always be there, but within it lies the possibility of authorship. That is the internalized fiction filter. A personal belief system editing reality to match its story. Not truth, not lies, but something in between. The fragile, shifting lens through which each of us decides what the world is, and who we are within it. Cosmic destiny frame. Across history, humanity has gazed into the dark and asked the same question. Is there a purpose to all of this? Are our choices our own, or are they fragments of a larger pattern, strands woven into a design that existed before we ever arrived? This is the cosmic destiny frame, the belief that we are not drifting alone in a meaningless void, but playing roles in a predetermined story that bends all choices toward a higher plan. And when enough people believe in that frame, it begins to shape reality itself. The idea of destiny is older than civilization. Ancient myths told of heroes fated by the stars, empires guided by gods, and prophecies that could not be escaped. Whether written in the constellations, etched in divine texts, or whispered by oracles, the belief in destiny gave coherence to chaos. War, famine, triumph, disaster, all became pieces of a larger picture. When you live inside the cosmic destiny frame, nothing is random. Everything is purposeful. And yet, the most haunting part is not whether destiny exists, but how the belief in it alters what people do. Tell a society they are chosen, and they rise with conviction. Tell them the stars demand conquest, and armies march. Tell them a savior is destined to arrive, and people will shape their entire history around preparing for it. Whether or not the destiny is real matters less than the power of believing it is. The story of fate bends choices, and choices bend reality. Psychologists call this the narrative frame effect. Once a story is accepted as truth, decisions align to fit within it. If life is believed to be random, people act one way. If life is believed to be written, they act another. Collective destiny is a frame so large it governs not just individual will, but the direction of cultures, nations, and civilizations. It is how empires justify their expansion, how revolutions justify their sacrifice, how communities endure hardship, by believing the suffering is a chapter, not an accident. But there is danger in the frame. If destiny is seen as predetermined, free will feels like illusion. At its extreme, people surrender their agency, believing their choices do not matter because the outcome is already set. At the same time, the belief can unleash terrifying certainty. A group convinced they are destined to rule, to conquer, or to purify will pursue it with relentless zeal, blind to the cost. The cosmic destiny frame comforts, but it also imprisons. It grants meaning, but it demands obedience to the imagined script. And yet, without it, history might look very different. Think of the great voyages, driven by the belief that explorers were destined to find new worlds. Think of movements for freedom, fueled by the conviction that liberation was inevitable. Think of scientific revolutions, inspired by the faith that the universe itself had written laws waiting to be discovered. The frame may be illusion, but illusion can move mountains. Belief in destiny is often the very force that creates it. The paradox is sharp. Destiny may not exist, yet the belief in destiny shapes reality as though it does. A society convinced of a cosmic purpose will live differently than one that is not. They will endure more, sacrifice more, build more, because their struggle is framed not as meaningless, but as necessary. The frame alters the weight of every choice, and so the future is rewritten, not by fate itself, but by the belief in fate. Even today, the cosmic destiny frame survives in new forms. Some see humanity destined to colonize other planets, to spread among the stars. Others see us destined to destroy ourselves, collapsing under the weight of our ambition. In both cases, the frame bends choices. Space programs, environmental movements, political struggles, all are fueled by visions of destiny, by the conviction that we are heading toward an inevitable horizon. Perhaps this is the deepest truth. The universe may not care, but humans cannot live without caring. We invent frames of destiny to protect ourselves from the abyss of randomness. We need to believe that suffering serves a purpose, that struggle has direction, that our brief lives are notes in a symphony rather than static in the void. And whether or not the symphony is real, the music we believe we hear drives us forward. So when you ask yourself if destiny exists, remember, the answer may not matter. What matters is how the frame shapes your choices, how it shapes the choices of entire civilizations. To believe you are part of a cosmic plan is to act differently than if you were not. And in those different actions, the illusion becomes real. The cosmic destiny frame is not proof of fate, it is proof of belief's power to create fate. In the end, destiny may not be written in the stars, but we act as if it is. And that belief, repeated across generations, builds the world we live in. Perhaps the script was never there. Perhaps we are the authors all along. But in believing the story was already written, we have given it power, and in that power, destiny, imagined or not, has always been fulfilled.